It is Friday, May 17th, and welcome to Covering Our Bases. From Mets to Mariners, we break down baseball's biggest highlights and headlines with unique context from every MLB team's perspective. Yes, as we cover our bases, we aim to educate, entertain, and engage the average baseball fan who just doesn't have the time to cover the other 29 teams around the league. Expect the fun storylines, patterns, predictions, and pageantry of Major League Baseball to be present at all times. And now, he's NL's Dan Harrow. I'm AL Warren Sprague. And Dan, sir, bat speed. Bat speed seems to be a topic of discussion here around the league as we notice some patterns around which players are the most successful and least successful at the plate, depending on power and contact capability. It seems like bat speed is making quite an impact in today's game. And I wondered, sir, can you kind of summarize for me or give me some idea of how bat speed can tell us how successful someone's going to be at the plate?
Absolutely. Bat speed is something that we've heard a lot in the Statcast era, but now it's something that is actually available online on Baseball Savant. So we can see who has the fastest and the slowest bat speed and what kind of correlates with that. And it doesn't really offer anything that's overall surprising to us. It's a lot of things that we see with our eyes that now we can just put numbers to and draw those fine lines between players. There's definitely correlations that we see between a higher bat speed and power. And kind of in the inverse, there's correlation we see between a lower bat speed and contact. So is not that being at the bottom or top of this list is anything bad. It just more tells the story of how players get to where they are. So like, for example, Shohei Ohtani has a average bat speed of 75.4 miles per hour. And that is like right on the cusp of what we would consider a fast swing. 75 and over is considered like a fast swing in this range. And your average in the league probably falls somewhere around 72, 73. So the highest being an 80 miles per hour by one Giancarlo Stanton. I don't think that's super surprising. Anyone that's seen him can see he has speed and power. And then the slowest bat speed belonging to Luis Arias, the new Padre.
Wow.
62.5, which is a nearly 18 mile per hour difference from top to bottom. So kind of shows you, right, Warren, if that makes sense, that it's about not necessarily being good or bad, but just the correlation to contact and to power.
When we look around the different players in the league, knowing who might seem more prominent, I guess I should say, in success, when you see who's hitting the RBI, who's hitting the home run, who's getting triples and doubles, all that good stuff, you notice that a lot of the players that are finding success are on one or the other of the extremes here, it would seem, right? So like we talk about Luis Arias, historically one of the best contact hitters in the league, being at the basement of this list. But look at Justin Turner, right? We've talked about him in a great light recently, playing for those Blue Jays as one of the best bright spots. He's near the bottom of the list here. At 66.6 miles per hour, there's Josh Rojas, who's been arguably the best overall hitter on the Mariners lineup. Over in Seattle, Bryson Stotts at 67%. Charlie Blackmon, good old Uncle Charlie, right? The other Uncle Charlie, I guess. Yeah. Over in Colorado, he's at 67, miles per hour too. Bryce Terrain, et cetera, et cetera. Like that's where those players are. You look at the top of the list in speed, and that's where, yes, you have Giancarlo Stanton, who's off to one of the better offensive starts in recent memory in his career. Kyle Schwarber, leadoff hitter for the Phillies, is near the top. O'Neal Cruz, who oscillates between being the future and the what's the word I'm looking for? The liability in Pittsburgh right now. He's second overall at 77.8. So that's the stuff I'm noticing that I find really interesting here. I mean, Acuna Jr. and Julio Rodriguez are near the top of bat speed, but not necessarily is that contributing to success, you might say, depending on what your litmus test for that is. Joe Adell, someone we've talked about off and on is needing to get it going for the Angels in order to stick on their lineup. He's number 8 in bat speed overall, among other chief contributing names like, say, well, I can't say Matt Chapman's chiefly contributing, but at least he's swinging the bat well, or fast. Aaron Judge is, of course, near the top 10. Christopher Morel from Chicago, the Cubs that is in the top 10. Interesting stuff here. Any patterns you're noticing, by the way, that you want to highlight before we move on from the topic and start breaking down to this week's power rankings?
Yeah, we can refine the splits a little bit deeper on bat speed. You can go as far as squared up and blasts. And so a squared up would be just good solid contact right on the face of the bat. And a blast is that squared up contact with a fast swing over 75 miles per hour. So a couple good correlations you could see there. For example, Milwaukee actually has 2 players in the top 3, Blake Perkins and William Contreras, in their percent of contact on squared up balls, both at 47%, which is almost half. And between them is Luis Arias at 47.5%. So super impressive. Their bat speeds are pretty different too. Contreras at a 74.4 and Perkins at a 70. So you could still have high contact with a little bit faster of a bat speed, with Luis Arias sandwiched between them at a 62, significantly lower. And then you have Juan Soto right behind, even higher bat speed, 76%, also has a 47.1% squared up contact percent rate. So a lot of numbers, but basically it tells the story of kind of these guys that we wouldn't talk about otherwise, like Blake Perkins, who's making fantastic contact with the ball at a very regular rate. And there's a lot deeper ways we can dig into this and kind of the appreciation in players that we couldn't before.
You do notice that he's becoming more of an offensive asset to the Milwaukee Brewers, who, by the way, one of the best offenses in baseball. So exciting. I think I can't wait to start talking about them because they were sinkers last week, where the Brewers, they won't be again this week. Spoiler alert. One of the more interesting offenses in the league. But I will go one more and say that I just kind of organized the information in this bat speed table here to kind of combine contact percentage with blasts, right? The best swings you want because you've got the best contact and you're putting your power behind it. And when you really look at who's got the most contact percentage from a blast type of swing, you see why guys like William Contreras are at the top of the list. You know, Juan Soto are at the top of the list. Shohei Ohtani's at the top of the list. And Aaron Judge, and Giancarlo Stanton. Those are your top 5 players combining contact percentage with a blast-like swing. And I would say those are 5 of the better hitters in the league by reputation. And you note, of course, 3 of them are New York Yankees, who had a bomb, 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 bomb. Guys, they had a perfect week last week when we chatted, Dan, and they, I think, lost only 1 game since our last chat. They just wrapped their series with the Twins. Those red-hot Twins that beat just about everybody found a brick wall in the form of the New York Yankees. Will the Yankees be atop our power rankings today? I don't know. I think we've got an exciting list for you this week. It's Revenge of the Bottom Feeders, and brace yourselves to not hear your typical team names listed in our power rankings until a little bit later on. You know, actually, Dan, one of my good Braves buddies was saying, you know, it's not really power rankings what you guys are doing, because at the end of the day, if they were, the best teams would be at the top. The worst teams would be at the bottom. We are basing our power rankings, guys, off of weekly results. At least I am. And I know Dan has a different way of thinking about this. But as we get into our power rankings this week, just brace yourselves, because it's not going to be your typical humdrum order you see when you're reading your online pundits with the same teams at the top every time. I'm excited. It's going to be a great list this week. And Dan, we've talked about who goes first every week being based around your Mets record versus my Mariners record. And this is getting kind of old, kind of quick, because the Mariners continue to have a better season. And unfortunately,
crazy.
Sorry. I mean, I didn't think the Mets were going to be struggling these past 2 weeks like they have. And I know we're going to be talking about them pretty quickly into our countdown, because statistically, buddy, whether you like it or not, one of the toughest, stories. As a matter of fact, you know what, Dan? Forgive me. If I'm going first, let's just
but their schedule, Warren. They play two of the best teams in the league. Come on, don't.
Oh, well, I'm telling you, whether you like it or not, I think New York's got to be one of the first three teams we talk about, the Mets, that is,
Oh.
today in the power ranking. So I'll put all the onus on you. If I'm going first, fine. You go ahead and find a team that's worse than the Mets to talk about next, and I'll just pretend like one of these teams is worse than the Mets to discuss. And I'll say the worst team in the league just to humor you and put you on the hot seat. This is hard. Why don't we go with the San Diego Padres? I'm telling you, this is a strange story, so we might as well start it off. They were one of our risers, or at least one of the teams I was most excited to talk about last week because they had just gotten Luis Arias, and now they find themselves at a 2-4 week. That means certainly they didn't immediately find the success they hoped for bringing him in, and the 2-4 week were at the hands of the Los Angeles Dodgers. But wait! They won that series. What? How can a team that beat the Los Angeles Dodgers 2 out of 3 be the worst team in the league? Well, that's because they went and took the success from that Dodgers series and flushed it, becoming the most recent victim of the flawless Rockies this week. They went 0-3 against the Rockies despite being recently loaded up with new offensive potency. So why not put the Padres here and suggest, did you really get what you wanted with this Arias trade? Are you sure you're offensively ready to sprint past people? I can argue that you're not until Manny Machado gets going. I would like to say he looks like the biggest black hole offensively for this team. And until he starts contributing the way the rest of the lineup generally does, they're going to continue to have roadblocks every single game. I think the Padres are not the worst team in the league, Dan, so speak on how you feel about me putting them there.
Well, it's a good thing these aren't real power rankings then, but I understand why you have them there, because especially from a Padres fan's perspective, I bet they would put them there too, because you're right. After a really gutsy series win in Petco against the Dodgers, the first in years, like 4 years, I think it was, Warren, they totally fell apart against the Rockies. They got booed off the field. It's just unacceptable. You're right. With just this recent trade acquisition and the expectations that were kind of put on the team just to at least stay competitive. And even if you lose one against the Rockies, it's ugly. But to lose all three is pathetic. And something that jumped out to me, Warren, was their struggles against left-handed pitching. Particularly, they have a top 6 offense in runs, in RBIs, in average, in their total slash line, but they are 21st in the league against left-handed pitching. Your favorite stat, Warren, WRC plus, they're only at a 91. I mean, it's abnormally bad, and it's a lineup that is relatively evenly distributed between righties and lefties with a couple of switch hitters in there. But the righty power hitters that are supposed to be crushing lefties are the ones that are struggling. Bogarts, Kim, Machado, Tatis. None of them are doing what they need to do. They're lucky that the lefty bats are kind of filling in and making up for it. And it does offer the idea of, well, these guys do get it going. Their offense could truly, because they're still top 6 without this, right? They could be one of the best offenses in the entire league if they can get that going. But weekends like this, weeks like this are really the kind of things that make you doubt moves like this recent trade that they just made. And we talked about maybe they should have gone after pitching, and maybe they should have. Maybe that would have helped. Some of these games were a little closer. So I don't know. It's really confusing. And I think the Padres have dug their own grave down to this 30th position in our not power rankings.
In our anti-power rankings, we gotta find a fun slogan for it. It's true, but we will somewhere along the lines. Yeah, the Padres can be in the basement to be here, and a lot of the inconsistency in Michael King's play is where I want to throw maybe a barb here, because while he is pitching so darn well overall, it's like hot and cold on the results it gives the team. We saw him pitch 2 key games over this past week. And to kind of explain that he did so well against the Dodgers, I want to highlight that he did throw 7 shutout innings, striking out 11 and walking only 3, handing it over to Ranger Suarez, who would go on to give the team the win in that matchup. And Campusano was the guy who scored the run that kind of determined everything before Luis Arias was able to walk it off, driving Campusano in from second and give them a big win over the Dodgers. Like, that was a great day. But then you look at what he did just yesterday against the Rockies, and and his ability to go 5-1 innings pitched just didn't add up to a win for them. He gave up 6 earned in that game, and that was what you wouldn't have expected, judging from how well he was able to manipulate the Dodgers lineup. So Michael King seems to be either really good or really bad until we find some solidification in what to expect from him. Maybe that's going to be part of why San Diego is going to get dragged down from time to time along the lines of, how Manny Machado makes a difference to the offense. So, Michael King, figure it out. You're either great or bad, and we want to know which is which. Oh, Dan, who's number 29? I can't think of too many teams that belong here better than the Mets, but maybe you're going to work real hard to avoid that.
No, you're right, Warren. I just didn't want to be last on the list. And honestly, the Padres are last. That's fine. That's even better. Yeah, it's the Mets. We won 1 game. I guess it was against, I don't know, Warren, you take it. It was against 2 of the best teams in not just the National League, but in all of baseball, the Atlanta Braves, which have been dominating for the whole year, and the team that has now passed them for 2 weeks running in the divisional standings in the Phillies. So,
yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Warren. Where else are we?
You poor guy. They're getting ready to face the Phillies in one more game today. That would be their 4th in a row. And that is going to, whether they succeed or fail, not make a difference to the week they've had. The Mets find themselves in the basement looking up, had currently a 1-5 record for the week. And it just doesn't work. And we can't say it any other way. You want to talk about consistency being an issue. I would like to argue Pete Alonso looks like one of the least consistent pieces for your team, and it's heartbreaking. You don't want to see it as the fan of the team in the room, buddy. And I was just kind of rooting for you to have a better series against Atlanta, but only won the 3rd one against them to kind of say, no, don't worry, we've got something up our sleeve, but not a lot. Because the Phillies have run right past them, and you don't want that. Bottom line, bad week for divisional kind of, what's the word? Clouding, and not clouding, but beating. And then that's just what you had this week, and you got to expect it's not working. You talk about a little story. There's 2. I have 2 questions for you, Dan. First, you had some huge roster moves all up and down the New York situation. Tell us about those this week, and do you have any faith it's going to change anything for the better?
That's a good question. Is it going to change anything for the better? I mean,
Yeah.
I hoped so, but we already saw a couple of them debut last night. So I guess we'll just get right into it. The roster moves were Joey Wendell is finally DFA'd. He was basically released. It's possible that he could still hold on as a minor league contract if he wanted to do that, but I think he's going to look for something else on a major league roster, and he might get that opportunity. He just 36 at bats this year, only managed a 493 OPS. And the thing that really killed him, because even after his early season struggles, the Mets gave him a chance, were just miscues in the field, defensive mistakes. And literally when he's in for Lindor or McNeil, like you can't make those mistakes. That's what we're paying you to do, to step in for those players. And he proved that he couldn't do it. And you know what? I really expected the Mets to kind of hold on to him a little bit longer since they signed him to a $2 million guaranteed contract, but they just cut ties and they went a different direction. They recalled Mark Vientos, who was absolutely crushed in AAA since they sent him down after hitting a walk-off homer to get the Mets their only, their 2nd win in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So great to see him come back. He had a 743 OPS Warren in 8 games in AAA. He's now recalled to take over that infielder spot. Now, technically, he can't play shortstop, so the only one that really can besides Lindor is Brett Beatty, who's kind of secured that place at 3rd now, luckily.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a little bit more of a question mark now that Wendell's not on the roster, but we're not really worried about that right now because really ever since Alvarez got hurt, we've been lacking that kind of young power, speed, And Vientos is all of those things. So to give him a relatively regular roster spot between second base and third base, maybe the occasional DH, totally worth it. So that is absolutely going to pay dividends. And it did in his very first at bat. He got an RBI double. So the team lost, but that was happening when Alvarez was doing the same thing. So as far as I'm concerned, yeah, that's a boon in the positive direction. On the other hand, we sent down recent starter Jose Butto, who struggled. Kind of had a couple of decent starts, but really has just struggled in his last few, including his last one against the Phillies. They called up Joey Lucchesi, who has been rehabbing in AAA. And part of the idea with that, like we talked about last week, you mentioned, Warren, was Adrian Hauser getting out of the rotation.
Yes, that'd be nice.
The Mets were actually considering keeping him in just to have a 6-man rotation to give everybody a little bit more rest. But they were kind of on the fence about it. And then they kind of said, if we have to use Hauser out of the bullpen, then we will, rather than use a different arm. And that is what they ended up doing in the first start, because Joey Lucchesi did not do so hot. Unfortunately, he got beat up pretty much instantly, only managed 4 1/3 innings, 10.38 ERA. Kind of fell apart the really second and especially third time through the order. They just kind of figured him out, that Phillies offense. And you would expect that from them. Like it wasn't, Joey Lucchesi is not one of our prized prospects. It's not surprising to see the Phillies beat up on him. And Adrian Hauser came in just to provide relief for a few innings, really left out there to die by the Mets at that point, and they just pounded him. 3 runs in 2 innings on him. And then the consistent thing throughout all of these games this week against the Braves, against the Phillies, we keep on loading the bases with walks and then walking a run in. I've seen them walk in a tying run. I've seen them walk in a tying run and then a leading run. I've seen us have 3-0 leads, walk in 2 runs, and then give up a 2-run homer. Like it is soul crushing to watch it happen so many times. And we're getting to a point where Senga and David Peterson are about 2 weeks away. When they return, we have to maintain a 6-man rotation to give everybody some rest and kind of recycle a little bit and reboot everybody, because the bullpen is just completely out of whack. Like they're not bad, they're just worn out. And having Manaea, Quintana, and Severino has been good, but they've really kind of proven that they have the occasional really great start, and then more often kind of middling and okay, and maybe can make it through 5 or 6 innings if you're lucky. And that's really good on a team where you have 1 or 2 aces, right? But when those 3 are your guys, I mean, Warren, that's just not, it's not good enough. It's just not. And yeah, it's all culminating against these really strong offenses we've seen over the last couple weeks, because the Mets, honestly, their offense has been okay in a lot of them, especially against good starting pitching. I mean, Aaron Nola beat up the Mets pretty well in a complete game, which is pretty impressive. But other than that, we had the lead several times against the Braves. The one win we managed against the Braves was probably our least competitive game, because it was a walk-off late in a game that we were not leading in, and as opposed to other games where the Phillies came back in 2 out of 3 against us already. The Braves managed it in their finale. So the offense has been okay. JD has 2 home runs, by the way. He's starting to get there, Warren. Finally. Finally, the Mets have a DH for the first time in forever. But yeah, and the only other thing I'd say, and I'm sorry, I'm almost done rambling, but
you're doing great. I just want to say I clearly poked a nerve this week.
Dude.
You poor guy. You're finally starting to treat the Mets like they're truly a disappointment to you in your soul. And I'm sorry that I've kind of coaxed it out of you to have them in the 29th spot at this point. And yeah, go ahead. Finish your thoughts.
Well, if they win today, then that would mean they managed 1 win against each. And that's kind of was my expectation for the week. So that's why, that's the only reason I would not have put them this low, is because I think I mentioned last week that we were going to get beat up by the Braves and the Phillies. But it's been disappointing. We've given Omar Narvaez a chance to be the starting catcher since Alvarez went down, and he has done so poorly. We recalled Tomas Nido, who was a backup for the last couple of years, and he's done fantastically. He's made 4 pickoffs successfully, which Narvaez has still not made a single one, and Alvarez only had 1. The Mets are still one of the worst teams. Definitely run on the Mets. But even with Nido doing well, we're still giving Narvaez a chance. And just every statistic, like he's not getting pickoffs. He has more pass balls than Nido and Alvarez. He has worse pitcher chemistry. Like pitchers have higher ERAs, and that's part of him calling games. I mean, in all of the statistics, Narvaez is just falling off a cliff. And when Alvarez does come back healthy, rather than seeing Nido sent back down, I would expect Narvaez to be DFA'd or what have you, even offered up as trade bait, because he's just not helping the team. And that's me after saying the offense has been relatively disappointing, but he's below the Mendoza line. That's someone where I'm going to wait for Lindor and Alonso go through all their stuff like we talked about, their hot and cold streaks. Narvaez is not good enough right now with Alvarez down. So,
well, I'm going to give you and all of the Mets listeners in our audience a big hug right now. You all just need to feel some support because, yeah, your team is the hardest to trust the eye test. Either it's bad and it could get better, or it's good and it could get worse. And this is the down week for sure. At least on the schedule this week is 3 games in Miami, which you can tell will lead to less burgers once again. Because
no burgers in Miami.
No burgers in Miami for this upcoming week with the Mets. They have to win these 3. And they're revving up after that to face Cleveland later in the week. And Cleveland, as we'll talk about later in our show, could be one of those teams we need to be concerned with. Maybe the lesser sustainable when you look at their pitching picture. So we'll hope that maybe the Mets can, prove to outlast them too. They could still be a team that can rise up, and as injuries start to fall off, could still stabilize. Look for them to have hopefully a better longer-term future. But we saw a tweet that was quickly deleted from the Mets ownership, and this is my last question for you, that suggested maybe they won't even let the Mets get there. Are we starting to see them circle the drain as potential, sellers here, Dan? It sounds like from the tweet that was deleted, that was the case.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of knew that the Mets would probably only acquire anybody this year that has term going into next year, but they are focused on next year. And so that means, since they do look like they will be probably fighting in the back of the wild card race, if they're lucky, if not completely out of it. They are, just like last year when they got really good returns for some really good players, probably going to sell. And like you said, owner deleted a tweet that was kind of basically confirming that and saying we're all in for next year. But it's still pretty early to say. That can change if they go on an absolute tear. But I really, even though it's disappointing to think of them selling off some good players that aren't under contract for more than a couple years, it's encouraging to know that we are going to make more of an effort next year. We kind of knew this going into this year. This is what this was going to be. We knew we weren't better than the Phillies or the Braves. We think that we can be, or at least be more competitive with them with the core pieces we have and then what we can acquire. And that means letting other pieces go. So we knew it was going to happen, but yeah, it does mean losing some pieces of our bullpen probably. And it does mean the Mets are probably going to be a seller to some extent at the deadline. I think that's safe to say now.
And it's too bad to hear that because just last week, you and I were talking about how this did seem like a consistently top 10 pitching staff, and pitching wins games and pitching can potentially win championships. And, to know that they're that fragile right now, that's really what we're reading, is that the Mets can go either way depending on these next couple of weeks, but it is trending towards the downward. If they can surprise us and pull off some key series wins here over the next couple of weeks, guys, maybe, just maybe, the tune changes. But keep an eye on the Mets as a team potentially getting ready to kiss off a lot of assets. And we wouldn't wish that for you, Dan, but here we are in May. It's the 16th or 17th, and we're already talking about that. So we'll hope for a better week for you next week. Big hug, everybody. Man. Sorry, Mets. Yeah. Well, we just talked about the Mets for 10 minutes, so speed running this thing is getting harder. Let's speed it up by discussing for the second week in a row a team that is in my basement, and that's the Detroit Tigers. And that's based mainly off of the strength of schedule or lack thereof that they walked into this week expecting, okay? They had the Houston Astros and the Miami Marlins on their list. And both of these games, mind you, were going to be in their home field. So you had to think Detroit was going to have a good week, but they did not. Finishing, in this case, losing both those series, 1 and 2, to Houston and Miami. You got to have Detroit now down here a little bit more. And, you exposed to me, Dan, that the AL Central was a little boring to you this week. And this is a pretty clear indicator that Detroit will continue to bore us if they cannot win games against teams like the ones we just talked about. Giving up a lot of momentum to Houston, who will appear later in our show. I'm warning you, the Astros are coming, folks. The Astros are coming. They proved it against Detroit this week, who just couldn't quite figure it out. And Dan, I wonder if you'll at least slide in something to say about Detroit as we pull up their numbers and point out certain players didn't quite do enough to keep them above water. Tariq Schoolball continues to be such a a capable pitcher, sure, with a 2.2 ERA across 49 innings pitched. And when you look at strikeouts, he is among the league leaders with 60. Jack Flaherty, friends, another starting pitcher for Detroit, is striking out 63 so far. So it's not like those two aren't doing their part. They both feature sub 4 ERAs. I mean, in the case of Jack Flaherty, guys, he's got a 388. So some of the pitching is not what to be concerned with. You look at Reese Olson; he's contributing to 2.9 across 47 and 1 innings pitched. Like, the pitching is still what you can be encouraged by. But we continue to see the offense not have enough against quality teams or quality offenses anyway. They're just not getting going. We talked about last week them maybe looking for one more veteran piece. I know you've got, Javier Baez, but he's a giant child and an immature one at that. So you need some bigger, veteran minds to come in here and be disciplined. And I think that's what they're lacking, even though Mark Canha kind of does contribute that to you. He's got that 1.0 WAR at this point, and Riley Green still has his 1.8. But that's where the offensive, excitement kind of stops. Guys like Kerry Carpenter haven't done what they needed to do. Carson Kelly hasn't been punching off the bench. Like, where do you look for the support offensively? It's not coming from Spencer Torkelson, and it's not coming from Javier Baez. What do these Tigers do to break through and look like a better team in the division or the league? I don't think there is a way right now on paper that I see. What do you think, Dan? Anything for the Tigers?
No, really young team, and that's in particular the ones that have been struggling. And like you mentioned, the only they have in the top 100 of the batting category is Mark Canha at number 100, and a lot of their team is so young. Specifically, Colt Keith has really struggled recently. His average is down to 171, and it's not something that is going to fix overnight. A lot of the younger pieces of this team are going to take time to get used to this. So we got to remember to kind of rebuild, and it is frustrating to see some of the talent on the team do well, and then guys like even Torkelson still 220 average, not quite as good as what you would want to see at this point in his development. So I would say just give it time for Detroit. Just be patient. Your pitching is something to lean on right now, and it's just really wide enough that there's no reason to be jumping on it at this point. But if we don't see some of these guys breaking out of it soon, I think you have to start considering sending them down to AAA, get into easier pitching, and maybe getting out of their heads.
Maybe you're trading some of those perceived assets for, well, more reliable ones. Maybe a Torkelson needs to be moved. I don't know. Maybe a Baez. Nobody wants a Baez. There's no way they'll get to move him. So, yeah, Detroit is not as prepared to climb these standings as they were a few weeks ago, and we can probably leave it at that. They need to clean it up and start steering in a better direction. And as we look forward into their schedule, worth pointing out is, they face some other kind of middling teams. I'm not going to sit here and say Arizona is as stiff competition as we expected them to be as they get ready to face the Tigers this week at home. And then the Royals, who are still consistently maybe near the top of that division, await them after their visit to Arizona. So Detroit's going to have to try to find some stability against two teams who, on paper, I think could have their number this week. Good luck, Detroit. We'll see you next week. Let's see if you can turn it around. And Dan, if you're ready, I know I'm ready to see who else you have up your sleeve now that the torturous portion of the countdown's over and you've already had to talk about your Mets. Maybe you're a little less emotionally charged about your next choice.
Yeah, just a little. I'd say coming up next, looking at really tough weeks, I have to say the Texas Rangers really struggled. Got swept up by the Rockies, just like we saw several teams do, and only managed one win in 3 against Cleveland. So pretty rough. The kind of thing I wanted to focus on here is that nearly half of the Rangers just starting roster is now on the injured list. 13 players. Warren, we got Jacob DeGrom, Max Scherzer, Tyler Mahle, names that we've all heard about before. But you have 3 position players, 4 relievers, as well as 6 stars, 100, way worse than what we've seen. And the rookies, they held up and they're leaving because they're not doing super valuable experience for them, but it's starting to mount. I mean, we've talked about the injuries just getting worse and worse. At this point, we're really just focusing on the replacement players that have and trying better results from them. I think it's okay 2 weeks ago to kind of have a week and say we're still trying to down a little bit, but after this week, and I'm managing at least winning Colorado and a couple more against Cleveland, it's
And yeah, Dan, for me, the Texas Rangers do need to be near the basement of tonight's rankings because they did have a terrible week against teams that you want to see them beat. And I know that's kind of a broken record for how I justify things, but clearly you don't want to get swept by the Colorado Rockies, no matter who you are. Clearly, you don't want to give up 2 losses to the Cleveland Guardians, even if they are a sharp opposition in these American League rankings. Like, your world champs are just taking some serious gut punches. And of course, as a divisional rival, would love to blaze by them and see us rise past them. This is good news, of course, for Seattle fans. But for me, as a fan of wanting to look like a strong team atop a division, it's a bummer to see the Texas Rangers, who sit still in second place out in the AL West, losing so much steam due to these injuries. And, you know, whether that pays off for us, the Mariners, in the standings eventually or not, you would wish a better story taking you to the top of the division. Let's see if Texas can get healthier. But first, they have to weather some extreme storms, and, well, at least they'll have an easier schedule to get them started. First, they face the Los Angeles Angels, Los Angeles Lakers. I'm sorry, everybody. Basketball playoffs, man. Basketball playoffs. There. Anyway, the Angels will be their first opponent, and then we'll have the Phillies for the Texas Rangers to look forward to. And that's going to be on the road, and the Phillies are so darn hard to beat that they'll need to really maybe sweep the Angels to feel confident enough to maybe take 1 or 2 from Philadelphia. I don't see it happening too easily. Look for Texas to have another middling week is my prediction. We'll see if they surprise us. But yes, Texas deserves to be down here. Good choice, my friend. Another team that I think deserves to be down here, despite typically beating better teams here or there, I'm going to go with the Washington Nationals next, Dan, at number, 26. And I like the Nationals down here because they couldn't quite pull off a plucky series win against the Red Sox. And then the White Sox. Yeah, they got kicked around by the Sox this week, period. And that's too bad when you think about how the White Sox have been performing at this point in the season. You would think the Nationals would be prepared to at least take them out. Even though Boston's been one of the better pitching teams in the league, they, well, just couldn't get enough offense to surpass them. The Nationals are just on a down week. 2-5 overall was their record. They prepare for Philadelphia too, you see. And everybody who's getting ready to face Philadelphia might as well put some L's on their schedule next to them because of how well they've been playing. Still to come will be their discussion. And Washington also can expect to be a little redder this upcoming week after facing Minnesota. I'm sure Minnesota is hungry to be rebounding after coming off a pretty crucial series loss for the first time in a while to the Yankees. So they'll be looking to rebound against the easier teams on their schedule. And whether you like it or not, the Nationals still resemble that on the schedule for Minnesota. Just an inferior team they're looking to run by. So it could be another tough week for the Nationals, and I think they belong right here in the basement. A divisional rival for you, Dan. You're probably grateful to see them struggle. Tell me how you feel about the Nationals coming in at 26.
Yeah, there's definitely starting to come back to earth a little bit from where they were. A 225 team batting average is pretty expected, I would say, to be honest. And they're not getting quite the pitching performances they were closer to the start of the year that was getting them a kind of hot wins earlier on. Shout out to Eddie Rosario, though, who Eddie Rosario had a batting average of .088 through April. Warren is struggling massively. But he was the NL Player of the Week last week with a 1.733 OPS, 3 home runs, 3 stolen bases, 7 RBIs, 5 walks. So talk about a rebound. Maybe they're figuring something out. I don't know. Maybe he can spread some messages to the rest of the team and kind of get some of their younger prospects going. This is another team that is deep in the rebuild, and I think a lot of people might look at the record and how things are trending, and they're falling below 500, and think maybe that they'll be a seller at the deadline. But I really do think that they're committed to the rebuild, and they have some pieces they're building around. And doesn't mean they're going to be a buyer, but I don't expect them to necessarily be a seller coming up at the deadline here.
They could probably move some of the older veterans that may not be long-term pieces of their future, should they choose to. Like maybe nod your head if you think a Jesse Winker could be somebody that they move away from because he's contributing. But, if the Nationals don't have a reason to expect playoff runs, he could be Winker, that is, a decent piece for a different team. And honestly, Rosario too. But we're still some weeks away from making the final call on the Nationals' pluckiness. They sit at 20 and 22 in the standings right now, just a shade below 500. So you can argue still overachieving beyond expectations. We're just projecting a tougher week for them. And, well, that's to be expected against Philadelphia and Minnesota. And they reside here in the countdown because we expect them to stick to this segment of the countdown next week too. As much as I like rooting for a Nationals team, and especially CJ Abrams to continue to break out, yeah, that's just where they belong. And I don't have any concerns sliding them here. Do you have any concerns picking the next team, Dan, for 25?
Not concerned, no, because the last sinker is pretty obviously to me more in the Cincinnati Reds, because things continue to kind of get worse for the Reds at this point. And I was trying to figure out what's going on with this team. I mean, it only managed 1 win against the Giants, which is, the Giants have been doing a little bit better of late, but still the Reds had an offense good enough that they should have been able to beat them up for at least another win. And then only 1 win and 2 losses against the Diamondbacks. And something that I kind of noticed in these last 2 series, and more overall for the year, that the Reds are still kind of that free running team that we've seen. They're fast on the base paths, they're aggressive, right? And that hasn't changed a lot from last year, but with all of the defensive mistakes that they've been making, in addition to the lack of power and offense that we've seen for the same lineup last year that also had Marte and TJ and McLean, right? It's not as balanced. They're not producing as many runs as they were. They're allowing more. And therefore, those rerunning ways are proving a little bit more costly. And it's especially been a problem with them leaving runners in scoring position. When they do have successful steals and get to second and third base, opposing pitchers are slamming the corners on them. It's kind of unusual. They're an NL worst 218 average. They have 400 strikeouts, but they really don't have a very bad chase rate. They actually have a pretty low chase rate. Their high strikeouts are just because, especially for the younger hitters, they're getting fooled on these corner pitches, and it's kind of the game plan to play the Reds right now. And I think these last 2 teams especially just kind of played it to perfection. Didn't get too worried about them getting on base and just took care of them at the plate. So the Reds are sinking. They are clearly going to have reinforcements later in the year, and that's something to look forward to. But it's about stopping the bleeding for right now and trying to keep things going. And that's not necessarily going to be easy with a couple of the series they have coming up, Warren.
Yeah, and that series, guys, of course, being 4 on the road against the Dodgers. Ouch. And then 3 at home against San Diego. And those are both teams that look better positioned right at the moment. San Diego, I think, just recently won a series against these Reds. And there's no reason to believe the Reds are in a better position to outplay them now that they've got Arias on their side. So look for Cincinnati to continue to slide, and they are scuffling for answers. They are not finding them as within Ellie De La Cruz exclusively. I mean, Ellie, if I'm not mistaken, leads the league currently in errors defensively too. So sometimes being a defensive liability counteracts all the different ways you can have a positive impact on the offense. And even though Ellie can run, and even though Ellie can hit, Ellie needs to play better defense to truly rise to the level of superstardom that they're going to need to see from him for the Reds to be trending upward. And the reason why we were so excited for them. Now, McLean is arguably the most exciting younger name on this roster. So as soon as he gets back, perhaps they do trend better together. But it's too long of a path to really expect that. So maybe we are looking at the Cincinnati rebuild carrying on through 2024, despite what we were kind of hoping for them earlier on in the year. But there's still so much left baseball to be played. I'm just not banking on the Reds having a better week starting now. So good spot for them to sit on our rankings, Dan. I'll let you leave it where you left it. You did well. And another team, however, that didn't do well this week, based on their expectations, it's time for us to acknowledge the Angels continue to stink. Boo. They were kind of high up our rankings earlier last week, but they shouldn't be after what they did here. They did drop some key series. First, 3 of 4 went to the Kansas City Royals, who you had to hope they were more on par with these Royals, circled as a potential wild card, I suppose, in the American League, are they? And you want the Angels to prove they could be in that mix too. But they've only got, I think it's 16 wins in the season. That's really not that much at this stage, having played 44 games. And you have to believe that, all of the young core that I'm always so excited about, that's now getting kind of mixed with names like Nico Goodrum and Willie Calhoun and Kevin Pillar. Like, those have been the guys contributing in Anaheim this past week. And not to knock anybody who's doing well for this team, it just seems like Ron Washington is super confused on the direction of the squad and the lineup most especially. He doesn't know how to splice it all together to have it making sense. And then, of course, the pitching, as always, is the Achilles heel of this Angels team that just doesn't seem to want to, focus on run prevention at any point. And we saw some exciting signs from guys like Anderson and to a lesser extent Sandoval, but the pitching out there isn't enough to help them weather this storm. And as they get ready to face the world champion Texas Rangers, hoping to rebound, of course, as they welcome the Angels in their home field. And then the Houston Astros, who are, Dan, whether you like it or not, getting better and better and better. The Astros are coming. Yes,
Light
Warren
the
Revere.
candles. 2x.
I'm so scared. Those Astros are blasting off, and they're probably going to shoot down some angels from heaven this week too. So another team that doesn't look like they're going to climb out of where they're at right now, as this week is giving way. Can they surprise us? I'm not holding my breath. Do you think they will, Dan? The Angels, however, are 24th for me.
It's weird, Warren. I think I was praising the Angels earlier this year for really playing small ball and taking advantage of that.
Yeah.
Now I feel like they're holding themselves back by it because Ron Washington, especially, like you kind of mentioned, it seems like he's accepted that we're not going to score if we're not doing the small ball things. He doesn't have the confidence, I guess, in the lineup. And you've seen them kind of lose some close games because of antics trying to, make a suicide squeeze work in a bases loaded situation. It just doesn't make any sense. Like, I've seen a lot of that. So it's kind of, it's trending in the other way. I think you're right to have the Angels this low because now I'm also starting to get a little concerned with their antics.
Yeah, and you don't need to talk about it too much. The thing that's got me most concerned about the Angels is their lack of understanding of their identity right now. They really don't know who they are. They really don't know who they're leaning on. And even though you've got Logan O'Hoppe, Zach Neto, and Taylor Ward, I would say are the three-headed real future of the lineup right now. They're mixing them with the Kevin Pillars, like I said. They're mixing them with the Goodrums, and like, what are you really looking for? You're looking for these veteran pieces who are just grateful for innings to play to spark something. A commendable strategy to an extent, but this is no Cinderella story that's brewing. There's just not enough here. And those vets look motivated and pretty darn good with a bat in their hands, but you still need to win games, and your pitching staff is being neglected through all this. You're doing none of your tinkering on that side. So it's just, you're not preventing the runs. So no matter how many times you score them, you're just bleeding out. So these Angels look like mortals, and I don't see it changing anytime soon. Yes. Thank you for agreeing. They are pretty poopy. Who's next, Dan?
Next up, think we should keep it out west. Let's do Oakland,
I
Warren.
agree. Yeah.
We'll do the Oakland Athletics. And,
Yeah.
a little disappointing. We've seen them lower, we've seen them higher, but they're going to take 23 this week. And it's just because they couldn't manage more than a single win against a really good Seattle team in 3 games, but also in 3 games against Houston, who has been struggling of late.
Mhm.
And I think the most thing that is disappointing about this is that meteoric rise that they had and how they lost it all almost immediately by going 1-5 this past week.
Yeah.
They're still now are only ahead of the White Sox in the American League with a team ERA of .220. So really just still overall not good enough. 4th in the league in home runs with 55, which is pretty impressive. And that's certainly they've been slugging their way to a couple of extra wins. But, I'm going to bring it up again, Warren. Like at a point now where I'm going to just start making calls. We're about 2 months out from the trade deadline. And I know that we're still a month away from trades even really being talked about, but I feel like I see this A's team, right? And I see them probably overperforming from what we thought that they would. And I think about the situation that they're in, right? This is their last season in Oakland. They're going to be going to Sacramento for 3 years at least, and then to Las Vegas. Like, Warren, if you were the owner of the team and you had this talent clearly on your team, and you knew that of this roster, a lot of them are not going to be here in 4 or 5 years when you're in Vegas. Several of them won't be there in even 1, 2, 3 years in Sacramento. Are you leaving them on the field for this fan base in Oakland that you've already kind of given the middle finger? Or are you gutting the team for as many resources as you can for your future to try and put a good team in Sacramento and then in Las Vegas?
So, slap me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of young quality talent already on this lineup. And you wonder, is it really all that exciting to sell them to make more young quality talent? I'm just like, when do you stop, selling to, feed this treadmill is the question. But you're right. When you think of the fact that a Soderstrom or a Langoliers or a Geloff or a Rooker may not be on this Athletics squad when they do start rebuilding an identity as the Las Vegas Athletics or whatever they're going to be, well, maybe you could sell those pieces and bank on getting other young names along those lines in the future. It's really on what you want to do and how much faith you have in the ability to get a fan base excited about this team. And I'm not super optimistic, so I think regardless of what you do right now as the Athletics, you're submitting yourself as a basement dweller in the culture of Major League Baseball for the next 4 years, probably. Why would you, except to inspire excitement in the Las Vegas fan base, right? Why would you be working hard to put something of quality together right now? So I know all I did was basically say, do what you want, Oakland. But that's what they're gonna do. I mean, that's where I expect them to be. Is not trying to be anybody of potency, no matter how well the kind of reject pieces in the Athletics lineup today can put it together from 8, across a series or 2 here or there. They're just a team that's in holding pattern. And sure, go ahead and sell your guys if you want to. You're going to make some other teams out there a little bit better with these various pieces that have created the top 4 home run total in Major League Baseball as to this point. You're going to make some teams happy, sure. I just, again, as always, would wish for competitive baseball across every single team in the league, and you don't want it from that standpoint for Oakland, but they're not going to be Oakland much longer. So what's the point of having an identity, wouldn't you say?
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's disappointing.
Kansas City's next for them. You got to expect them to be more ready for the now than the Athletics are. And then, Colorado's up next after that. And who knows what kind of Colorado team they're going to face. If they're anything like the one that was on the field this past week, you don't want to face the Rockies. And it's a rocky road indeed for the Athletics. They'll probably stumble, break an ankle, tear a tendon. And those athletes will be on the bench again.
Hammy. Probably.
Yeah, with all the hammy injuries we've been seeing recently around the league, yeah, you're not exactly wrong. Cool, man. Oakland, continue to be red. And we're running out of red teams. But one team I think I have to harp on for the third week in a row because I was so, as always, guys, excited to think they could win some games and continually disappointed by their ability to lose, is the Pittsburgh Pirates, the Buccos.
Yarg.
Welcome back. Yeah, walk me plank yet again. I think the bright spot of the week, right, was the Paul Skeens call-up and how that
Definitely.
game against the Cubs, thank you, Dan. Yeah, it was so exciting. They went back and forth, back and forth. Skeens wasn't part of the determining factor eventually. You know, they needed other pitchers to give them the win in that one game. But that was the game that the Pittsburgh Pirates took from the Chicago Cubs. And then they went on to face the other, top contender in this division, Milwaukee, and similarly lost 2 games to them. So with a, 2-4 record, they are objectively losers this week. And as they get ready to face the Cubs 4 more times, this time in Chicago, you have to think they're on the ropes for that matchup a little bit. I would predict maybe a 1-3 series loss. And then we're going to have the Giants for the Buccos after that. And that could maybe be an interesting series between 2 teams that need to prove they can still win some. So Pittsburgh is continuing to lose momentum, may not regain it this week. They deserve to be in this spot. And not a ton of super encouraging signs, if you don't mind me saying, unless O'Neal Cruz starts cleaning up his play similarly to what we're calling from Ellie De La Cruz out in Cincinnati. Like this is a star that is not performing like one as consistently as you may think. What do you think of Pirates, buddy? I'm sure you're pretty unsurprised to see them lower down after the week they had.
Yeah, I'm more surprised that you dug up the Pirates last week to bury more on them, and then you had to find your unmarked grave and dig them up again this week to sink them out at sea.
Not exactly buried treasure are these Pirates right now. They are like floaters bloated along the top of the surf, my friend.
I mean, the one thing I'll say is we talked about bat speed earlier, and it's worth saying that O'Neal Cruz is actually second in bat speed and really shows with his high contact rate and that he's 10th in blast, that incredible raw power, which we've seen from him before. So when he's squared up, he really is sending it. So yeah, hopefully he can do that more consistently. And then just skiing was awesome to see. And he had adrenaline definitely in that first start, and his fastball was kind of a bit all over the place. We actually saw his most reliable and most used pitch was that hybrid splitter sinker that he has, Warren, that I think he calls the splinker. Which befuddled a bunch of Cubs hitters I saw. So kind of interesting to see him go out there. But I think we'll see a lot more from him in his next start. And I think he's pretty much proven at this point that he should remain with the team just for his own development. It's important that he stays with them the rest of the season. And it'll be exciting to see his next start and all of them after.
Yeah, the Pirates have the 17th, lowest ERA, I suppose, amongst pitching staffs. And now I guess the fun we can have would be watching where that trends in the coming weeks and months, because they do have an impressive young rotation of at least 3 arms worth watching. Keller, Jones, and now Skeens. You can think that they're strong enough to be maybe the best rotation in the division. I mean, Milwaukee and Chicago will challenge that, but I would actually expect the Pirates to be a middling team in this division for the foreseeable future, maybe sparring with Cincinnati while they continue to find their identity. And it's not going to be counted out from being interesting baseball, but I would challenge that we're not likely to see winning baseball as consistently coming out of Pittsburgh until some of these trends start reversing. Pardon the background noise, everybody. I'm in a different location than normal, so I appreciate you all being patient with that. And so I think we've said what we can say about Pittsburgh not trending positively now, as we're somewhat used to from this franchise. But if the pieces rebound, we could be a third-place team in this division when it's all said and done by the end of the year. It would just take a pretty miraculous turnaround for it to be anything more interesting than that. And even then, I'm sure you're going to argue I'm giving them a little too much credit. But I think the potential's there. It's just a ways away from being focused enough, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. We're running out of teams that did poorly this week, but there's one that really did do poorly that surprises us all. The question is if Dan's going to highlight them next or if he'll wait for me to do it after this. Who is spot number 21, my friend, on our countdown?
You'll have to tell me if I disappointed you or not, Warren. But for me, 21 is the Boston Red Sox.
Ooh. Okay. No, that's not who I was going to target. So I know who I've
All
got
right.
next. But talk
Excellent.
to me about your Sox, where the Reddies are, and why they're ready to be number 21 on our countdown.
It's worth really giving them credit for sticking around at 500, right around there. Got a great positive run differential, mostly off of that excellent and still league leading team ERA at a 2.74 right now, and 6 shutouts, also tied for the league lead. And really worth calling out, while we've had Pivetta and Bello, though they're back now, while they were out, we had Cooper Criswell step in, and somebody that really was not a known quantity in recent years. He's kind of bounced around a little bit before signing with Boston this year. And he's been excellent through 5 starts. He's got a 1.93 ERA. And now with Pivetta and Bello back, he just adds to that already strong rotation. But the offense is still the thing that's concerning. And in this past week, they had suffered a loss to Washington and 2 losses to Tampa Bay. And their lack of offense is becoming more and more apparent. Rafael Devers is the only Boston player in the top 50 of the MLB hitters. And obviously, we've talked about the time that he's missed this year. O'Neal Cruz hit his 10th home run of the year just the other night, and the Red Sox still lost. And we're seeing a lot more of that. So the offense is frustrating for the Sox team. I think that we've seen them kind of backsliding since the start of the year. And it's become pretty apparent now that the pitching is really the only thing that's holding them up, I think, this far into the season.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty fair summary. I would take that away too. And the hitting is leaving so much to be desired. There's plenty of young pieces here, but a lot of them are injured. Tristan Casas is a player we would have liked to see take a big step forward this year. He's out. Trevor Story, of course, took that shoulder injury I still see in my mind from a few weeks ago. Yeah. So you're hoping guys like Duran and Wilyer Abreu, by the way, maybe Sadanye Rafala could be getting enough momentum. Connor Juan comes to mind too. These younger guys contributing offensively enough to help Tyler O'Neill and to help Rafael Devers. Not that Devers has been, the all-star caliber player that we're used to seeing from him in years past. They're just not getting the young additions to the offense that they need to really complement this surprisingly strong pitching staff, and they're not beating the teams when it matters most. So they're losing some steam as our outlook, towards the rest of the season can start coming together. We'll see if they can get some ground back. I mean, some more middling teams on the schedule for them at least. They get ready to face St. Louis in St. Louis, who are coming off a good series, by the way, and have yet to be talked about today. And then the Braves are another kind of hot and cold team who will greet them at home later in the week. So maybe another middling week is what I would predict from Boston, unless they surprise us. But again, we're starting to see fewer and fewer surprises as we start to figure out the identities of these teams. And the identity of the Red Sox seems like a team that is maybe 40% when you want to be a 60% to potentially make the playoffs. You know what I mean? The likelihood of their magical run resulting in something exciting for this fan base is becoming less and less plucky, if you will. So Boston sitting here makes sense to me. A fine choice, Dan. A fine choice for 21. How about number 20 being a team that, quite frankly, has looked so much hotter in the last couple of weeks, guys? You'll remember they got the VIP treatment when they scored 10 straight victories, and even last week looked like one of the better teams in the league. And really, overall, you have to think the Minnesota Twins are going to be okay as the season progresses because their offense is still generally hotter than the teams around them. But they did start to see the air get let out of their balloon a tad as they had a 2-4 week. They did win their series against Toronto 2-1. You have to expect that. Toronto's not a playoff team right now, but they are going to get talked about after the Twins because the Twins then got swept by the Yankees. And the Yankees are solidifying themselves as one of the teams to beat out in the American League. We can't be totally shocked by that, mind you. But were they going to sweep these Twins? I didn't think so. So they took enough of a step backwards from that result that I think they deserve to be here at number 20. And certainly their 2-4 record for the week shows that these Twins are not a lock for playoff baseball yet. You look around the rest of the division, though, you have to think it's favorable enough. We'll talk about why I feel that way about Cleveland in a bit. Kansas City also, not so much of a dominant week, so still super duper winnable as the division. But Minnesota sits here at 2-4 because of this week's results. Can they take out Cleveland in Cleveland in the next series? We'll see. After that, they get the Nationals, who could be an easier target. So perhaps they'll rebound. We'll find out. What do you think of the Twins at number 20, man? Am I breaking too many hearts here?
Hey, it's the reality of a tough week, and unfortunately playing the Yankees, right? And I think that they will rebound. The home run sausage is still with them, Warren. And that's why they won 2 games in Toronto.
It's getting increasingly rancid, my guy. Okay.
Oh, yeah. It's getting dangerous, absolutely. But, tough series against the Yankees. The offense was pretty non-existent, unfortunately, and they're not getting the help from the pitching like they were. And I do think that they're going to rebound and hopefully have a strong week to stay right there with it. But a couple red flags, these Twins are popping up, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I would be worried. And, injuries are always a thing to talk about, right? So that's always kind of looming over this team.
Yeah, certainly looming, certainly threatening, certainly creating some noise in the background. Absolutely. Noise in the background that is going to kind of maybe impact the issues that we're seeing with the Twins as they keep going. But maybe some of that noise will clear and they'll rebound a tad this week. Let's hope for a yellow or a green week for them, right? One that's a little bit better than the red they faced here. So, sir, it's your turn. We are now exclusively out of the teams that had terrible weeks, okay? So now we're all in the middling area, and this can go any way we want. I'm super excited to see who you choose to shoot at next. There's some still pretty garbage teams on the board here.
Definitely. Number 19, we're in the middle. We've got a lot of explaining to do, I think, Warren, but let's throw the Miami Marlins.
Good, yeah.
It might be their highest spot at this point in the anti-rankings. But yeah, you know what? Managed to win against Philly. Mets couldn't do that. And then 2 against the struggling Detroit. I don't think that's as impressive because we've talked already about they have been struggling severely. But they got to win at home, Warren. Hooray.
Yay, a burger for the fans.
Philly was very kind to allow that. So, hey, that's a little bit on the positive side. A 4-3 week for Miami. Unfortunately, that run differential of -87 kind of says it all. It's a combination struggles of the pitching staff. They've thrown a few rookies in there, and they don't really have anything on the horizon that's going to be improving it for them. Their team ERA currently sits at a 4.98, just below where the Rockies are, but really worlds behind. The next team ahead of them is the Angels, a 4.77. Yeah. So kind of sad to see what's going on in Miami. We talked about how they would probably continue to sell off at some point in the future. You still expect that to happen, but you know what? Props to them, and this ranking hopefully reflects that. Props to them for at least getting 3 wins this week. It's pretty impressive for a team that only managed 10 going into this week.
Yeah, I think whether we like it or not, for the foreseeable future, we're going to be talking about which pieces leave this Marlins team as opposed to solidifies them as a playoff contender again after making the playoffs for the 4th franchise time last year. They've proven that they don't care about this year. They don't have any reason for anyone to take stock in them. And now it's just like De La Cruz and Chisholm, Bell, we're going to watch them get sold off at some point during the season. Nick Gordon, Jesus Sanchez, right? Like, you have to think these players are on the move so that some teams with some real hope can benefit from what they can do. And certainly De La Cruz is among those that I would want to pick up. If it were I mean, we can always use one more guy contributing 9 home runs at this stage of the year in a lineup in Seattle, or really any team should want to pick up a guy like that. Josh Bell's got some good power too, and we've seen him move around a lot. It's sad that he tries to set down some roots in Miami and will likely be someone traded off anyway for his trouble. So that's really the exciting part of what we get to talk about when it comes to Miami these days, is going to be which pieces no longer fit on this team as they get more and more listless in the standings. Oh well, it's what we can expect. So we'll look forward to seeing if they can do anything this week of merit, get a couple more wins, maybe get a burger. Actually, they're going to be at home for the next 6 against the Mets and the Brewers. So 2 teams that still feel like they're probably going to beat them, even your Mets. So let's hope so for your sake. And the Brewers they just got too much offense, baby. Too much offense in Milwaukee.
No burgers in Miami.
No, sir. The theme continues. Yes, an appropriate pick to sit here are those Marlins. And as we head into number 18, we're looking at other middling teams who had middling results who are trending in the downward here with these selections. And I'm going to go with the next team being the Toronto Blue Jays. They really shouldn't deserve to be better than this in the lineups or the countdowns, I should say, guys, because they continue to look like a team that won't make the playoffs. They are not winning enough games to trend in the positive direction. First, they lose 2 to Minnesota, as is expected. Kudos getting 1 win, I guess, against the Twins. And then because of 1 game getting scratched from the schedule, their visit to Baltimore resulted in a split. So, like we said last week, how Toronto fans can sleep well knowing that they beat these 2 playoff teams, right, at least once in their series. The same can be said this week. Congrats, Toronto. You may think you can beat Baltimore in a series if you could beat them once. You may think you could beat Minnesota in a series if you could beat them once, and that's really all you get to sleep well with this week. You did go 2-3, a middle of the road week, even though it is a losing record. And as we look forward, you get to continue to face teams that may help you or hurt you, depending on whether you can rise to the occasion. You've got 3 with Tampa Bay. You've got 3 with the White Sox. Both teams may or may not beat them with the way they've been playing recently. And then you've got 4 in Detroit. So that series, I think, is going to be really important for both those teams, the Detroit and Blue Jays series. I would be watching that one closely near the coverage we'll be providing next week may include that Detroit series, or really we may talk about it in 2 weeks. So watch that one, guys. Keep an eye on both those teams for that. How about that, Toronto or Dan? What do you think of Toronto being sitting at 18 for us?
I am Toronto.
What's that, buddy?
I just said I am Toronto. You call me. Yeah, I think that's a good spot for the Blue Jays. I think it's just worth saying that they've kind of won their games this week without Justin Turner. He's gone 0 for 11. And we've actually seen Bichette and Vladdy really step it up. Both of them hitting basically 500 over this last week. And still, unfortunately, we see struggles from Varsho and Biggio, and it's the lack of consistency. But they only need a few pieces to pop off to get them the wins. It's when all of them are popping off they can be dangerous. And of course, I still think we've yet to see that, Warren. And that might happen at some point. We should remember, especially with the pitching staff being as pretty solid as it has been, they might reach a point in the year where the bats just get hot and all of a sudden this team is skyrocketing to the top of the rankings, a la the Twins or maybe somebody else this week.
And I'll cut in long enough to admit you're right. I mean, they're only 19-23. They're just 4 below 500. There's still plenty of time for Toronto to prove that they can be a playoff team. And it's kind of exciting, but it's a redemption arc they're taking a while to let balloon. And you're slowly seeing Vladdy Guerrero get his legs under him offensively, which they're going to need. But you mentioned it already that Bo Bichette continues to be a liability for them. And you just don't expect that to be the case for him. Definitely disappointing. You have to maybe call him out as one of the more disappointing players in the entire league at this stage of the season. I hope you'll agree with that.
Yeah, definitely would agree with that. And, the last thing I want to point out, Warren, is that Alex Manoah in his last start, 0.000 ERA. Very impressive. 4 hits, but only run that was allowed was from the previous pitcher. So good to see Manoah doing something out of the pen.
For all the times we've talked about the offensive pieces, that is, the legacy pieces being the determinant factors of the future of Toronto, you would think Alex Manoah may even be more so. I remember a few years ago, this team that did make the playoffs had an Alex Manoah that looked like a world beater. Last year, he had one of the strangest, collapses of any young starting pitcher you can imagine across the league. So I got to be honest with you, I'm almost rooting for him to continue this trend of play because I've hyped Toronto as kind of a litmus test for the playoff picture in the American League. And you kind of want to see a team like this succeed so that their story doesn't end up so sad as it's trending towards. Alex Manoah is as pivotal to anybody else in that future in Toronto as the offensive pieces. So keep it up. Maybe he's going to be the X factor that instead of removing Toronto as a contender as he ultimately did last year, maybe he'll be the good story, the core of the redemption arc if Toronto can pull it off. But he's starting at the right point and it needs to continue. Good luck, Toronto, seeing if that holds true. Do you think Manoah could be the reason why they succeed or fail in making the playoffs this year, Dan?
I think that he's a huge part of it. I think that if he was a little bit more consistent over the last couple of years, they probably could have made the postseason when they missed and won some of the games when they got swept away in the postseason. So yeah, absolutely. He's a difference maker because if you're in a 3-game series, he should be one of the guys you're starting for one of those. And he hasn't been that guy. So if he can find that form again, that would be a huge improvement for Toronto.
Yes, it would be. Can they improve? Can they stabilize? Can they win enough games to climb out of the slight basement they've built for themselves? It's still possible, and that's why Toronto belongs in the middle of these rankings. Dan, your turn. Which team is going to sit at 17 as we start to approach the middle point of our rankings? We're doing a really good job going fast, I can tell. Really good job.
Really good. Yeah, for 17, let's drop in the Tampa Bay Rays, Warren.
Ooh,
they had a 3-3 week. What was that?
Oh, I was going to say going from the air to the sea with this one.
There you go. Nice.
Or is it the sky? I don't know. Which definition of array are we playing with?
I still don't know what Amanda Ray is. Anyway, they managed one win against the Yankees. They were able to do it, Warren, and then 2 against Boston. So 3 wins for the Rays, and this is especially promising after a 1-5 road trip that it kind of resulted in the players having a closed door meeting. And right from out of that is when they went ahead and swept the Mets and then kind of tried to carry that momentum forward. So it's pretty promising to see them rebounding over these last 2 weeks and getting themselves to 500. But if you look at Fangraphs, the Rays actually have had the easiest schedule in terms of strength of schedule up until this point. And kind of therefore, right, they have one of the hardest schedules in the league going forward. And that's just obviously taking into account their division as well, which we know is already very, very good. So good to see the Rays. I do have them rising a little bit, and hopefully they're going to continue to ride this wake forward. But cautiously optimistic with the Rays team. Their batting has rebounded of late, like we talked about, but I'm still questioning whether that's something they can maintain consistently.
Yeah, and consistency has been the core problem to this team. I mean, they still have so many of the pieces that did so well last year. So you have to think that it's in there if the consistency can increase. You're seeing Yandy Diaz play better recently, I would say. You're also seeing Isaac Paredes continue to be the heat pump for the offense out in Tampa Bay. I will point out Jose Caballero, who at first appeared to be quite the asset for this squad, is dragging them down a bit with his errors. I've been watching errors a lot recently as kind of an indicator of the aptitude of a player. So Jose Caballero is trending in the bottom 5, I believe, in errors in the league. And you don't want to see that be a liability because otherwise his play appears to the eye test to be helping them. So just thoughts I have on that. Ahmed Rosario, I think, has been really impressive fitting into this squad too. So there's still plenty of room for it to be a good story for the Rays. I do think of them as one that will back out of the American League playoff race almost at the last second. And it could hold true that comes to pass. But if a Randy or a Rosarena and a Brandon Lau and a Josh Lau start contributing more to the offense more consistently, never mind. Maybe the Rays could squeeze into a playoff picture depending on how all these other teams finish. We shall see. But they're more interesting than we gave them credit for when the season started. And their week upcoming will continue to be interesting. They do have 3 in Toronto. A great litmus test for both teams right now, too. And then they're going to be at home against the Red Sox. So 2 very important divisional series. And at 22-22, it's going to be a direct indicator of where the Rays fall this upcoming week, right? Like they're right in the position to either sink or swim. And we'll have to decide depending on which Ray we're talking about here.
Yeah, exactly.
If they really do stay afloat. So good luck, Tampa. Sitting in the middle portion of the rankings seems fair. I'm actually surprised this team gets to sit in the middle portion of our rankings too. They actually sit at just above our mid spot, number 16, do the St. Louis Cardinals after 3 and 4 weeks. Surprisingly mid for them. They gave up 3 losses to the Milwaukee Brewers out of 4 chances. That's to be expected. It was literally feast versus famine in that matchup because Milwaukee's been playing oh so well. But then they took on the Los Angeles Angels in Anaheim between 2 teams that needed a series win. They actually came out on top. So the Redbirds get to take a nod and a way better spot than they typically do in our countdown because of a middling week against teams that, both of them should have beat them, in my opinion, even though the Angels are as poopy as they are. But they didn't. So Boston's on the docket next for St. Louis, another cool test for them, and then Baltimore. So they're getting ready to run the East Coast of the American League and likely won't have as good a week as they did this week, but you never know. Maybe they do something cool against Boston, who's starting to struggle a tad. St. Louis is just pretty mid, though, my friend, and mid at best. Oh, and by the way, the one pitcher who lost, yesterday to those Angels, Lance Lynn. So, yeah, still, of course, not convincing me as one of the solutions out in St. Louis. It's really just that this team is treading water if they're lucky enough to do that. Could they put it all together and create a playoff run? They're at 18-25. They really need to start making up ground, and I just don't see it being the case yet when I look at the schedule here. What do you think, Dan? Any hope for the Redbirds left in your heart in the long term?
Well, the pitching is showing more cracks, like you mentioned with Lynn, and even Sonny Gray has been relatively human of late to the point where Kyle Gibson is leading the team in wins and in quality starts as well. And I believe in team ERA and strikeouts. So, I'm sorry. No, Sonny Gray is still leading the team in strikeouts. So there's that. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot that's disappointing about the Cardinals, and you can't just keep waiting for this to change and that to change when now we get to almost a year and a half of some of these trends, right? It's pretty concerning. And if I'm the Cardinals at this point, I'm pretty frustrated, but I don't even know what to do with this team more. And you made some commitments in the offseason to win this year. You're not really in a position where you can just sell off assets. I feel like they need to, if anything, kind of reload and go all in with this, or else there's too many huge contracts that are just your albatross too for who knows how long. I wouldn't be surprised if the Cardinals get more aggressive, put their foot harder down on the gas to try and get themselves out of this stink that they're in.
Yikes. I fear for them. If they invest too much more into the lineup as it is, I call it empty money, whether you make a playoff run or not, because they're not going to beat the upper tier teams in the National League on paper, let alone the American League. I've been noticing, for the record, by the way, Dan, that the National League is considerably less winning than the American League. So when you're already looking at a middling team in the worst of the 2 conferences, they're actually looking at a kind of a bad team. So I would hope they're not dumb enough to go and pummel themselves with more investments when Goldschmidt's already looking like somebody you don't want to reinvest in next year. I'm sorry,
Definitely.
Paul Goldschmidt. That era might be coming to a close.
Yeah.
And Nolan Arenado has been equally scuffling. Like, how can you look at this squad and think we're just a couple pieces away? I can't imagine that. But if you're telling me that's what happens and it comes to pass, Dan, this is going to be one of the stupider sports franchises that I've looked at in a little while. And you know me, I don't say stupid about folks and, organizations often, but I hope your prophecy doesn't come to pass because it just doesn't feel like they should. They just shouldn't think that they can win this season, I should say. They just can't. And I know what you're thinking, Dan. I just don't like the Cardinals, and I don't know where that came from per se. I mean, I used to cheer for a Mark McGuire when he was, not a steroid canceled individual. I don't hate the Cardinals for any reason other than I think they're pretenders and they're not going to be making smart moves if they invest more in this squad as it is. Sorry, that's how I feel. But they are 16th in our list this week, probably generously. They snuck under the radar to this point. I'll admit it. I should have snuck them in a little sooner. They're just worse teams in front of me. Now we're looking at the top 15 around our league, and everybody from here on out, I would say, is a strong baseball team. You really can't call any of these guys mediocre. Oh, wait, I'm lying to you. The Giants. The Giants suck, and they're number 15 for me. They had a better week than they typically do, winning just half their games and losing the other half. We'll talk about a little bit about the matchups, and maybe that's how they got to end up here. But you see, they beat the Cincinnati Reds 2-1, another team that's trying to find their identity, and then predictably gave 2 of 3 away to the Dodgers. Kudos getting 1 against them on Wednesday night, honestly. So you know what I'm going to say. The Giants are just more bad than they are good. And they're getting ready to test themselves against Colorado and then against Pittsburgh. So teams that they could very well beat and come out looking better, but they're 20-25 at this point in the season. And they are trending towards the bottom of their division, right? Only the Rockies, I believe, are positioned worse at this stage, 4th in their division. We've predicted them as a potential playoff team, but the pieces are not performing as such, and the injuries are stacking up. You've got a lot of this starting squad on the IL right now, and I believe we can look through the list and be pretty jaw dropped by their scenario. So you can't think that they have what it takes to beat a lot of the topper tier contenders right now in this stage of the season, and they're gonna dig themselves a bigger hole before it's time to climb out or before they can expect to climb out, and I just don't see it happening. Is there a mathematical way you do at this point, Dan? I ask you every week. I put you on the spot, but I know you're losing hope in this team too.
I hate the Cardinals. And that's all I have to say about it, Warren.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all. Keep it simple. Keep it smooth. They really made you look like a bad baseball analyst so far, buddy. I would like to see them rebound for your sake. Your credibility.
Let me live that down, are you?
Them and the Giants, man. I'm off to a good start at the moment.
I know. Believe me. I know.
Big hearts, though. I'm only teasing you. I don't blame you for having so little to say about the Cardinals. It really speaks for themselves. They're just spinning, and they don't look like a team that should be investing in themselves. Let's see if they make that mistake. But they're probably not.
You bring up a good point too. We are about a quarter of the way through the season, and I think at the halfway point, we should definitely take a closer look at our preseason predictions, and that'll be a great time to ridicule each other.
Yeah, and we will. I mean, we are good friends. We are allowed to take shots at each other, and we should feel safe knowing that we're going to be wrong a lot from year after year, right? Baseball's a game you can't predict as easily as some of the other sports, and even arguably you shouldn't even pretend like you can other sports. Anyway, but yeah, we better get used to poking fun at each other. I know I'm going to be worthy of it with some of my choices later in the season too. I would think so. I mean, look at what O'Neal Cruz has not done for example. He doesn't even look like he's going to earn his way into the home run derby, even though when he does hit one here or there, it goes really far. But we already had time to talk about the Buccos. We've now talked about the Redbirds. They sit, luckily for them, at the midway point of our countdown. Who's number 14 for you, my friend?
Sorry, wait, 14 or 15?
15. You're totally right. You're the odd guy again. You poor individual.
Every week, Warren. Yeah. So 15. It's kind of surprising they made it up this far, Warren. But I think it's the San Francisco Giants, and I think it really goes without saying that they did manage the wins. We talked about the struggles they've had, so a little bit less impressive on the red side of things. But I think anybody that gets a win against the Dodgers deserves to shoot up there a little bit. We've been starting to see the Giants offense slowly coming to life. It's taken a little bit longer than we probably expected it to, as you've pointed out, Warren, as I have expected it to time and time again. We talked a lot about how they have been a home run deficient team, and that's still overall true, but it's encouraging to see a few more players starting to creep up there. Chapman's at 5 now, Estrada's at 6, and Conforto now leads the team with 7. So that's a little bit more promising. I'm disappointed. I'm going to harp on the Mendoza line a little bit. A few players that are still hovering around that Mendoza line, like Wilmer Flores, Jorge Soler is still probably a little bit too close to that line. And then for the games that Austin Slater has played, he hasn't really impressed or shown any inclination to get any more playing time. So, the Giants are kind of, I think.
Yeah, for me, I'm with you all the way. You know how I feel about the Giants. Another one of your call-outs that just doesn't want to put together the winning team that we would have hoped for that result to come to pass. So I'm not sitting here expecting the Giants to be a better team as they go on in the path that they're going. They've got too many injuries is another thing we should talk about. Like, a lot of their starting pieces find themselves on the outside of the game looking in as an active member, and that's just going to continue to drag them down. Even against basement teams or bottom dwelling teams like Colorado coming up, with the trend that they're on, and Pittsburgh after that, you have to think the Giants aren't a lock for either of these series, and that's not where you want to be against franchises like that. So, long way to go for the Giants to show that they're really ready to become a better team. And it may not be this year. I at least don't have much faith in it being that. And it may not even start this week, buddy. It may not even start this week. So let's leave the Giants alone. They were probably the last of the truly mediocre teams on this countdown, though you can argue my next team is mediocre, even though I want to bandwagon them to the moon. The Arizona Diamondbacks. Let's talk about them next. Sticking to the AL West, or the National League West division, excuse me. The Arizona Diamondbacks are the team, I believe, that will sit in third at the moment still, despite everything, because they've been off to a mediocre start. We've talked about that a lot. They had a mediocre week 2, losing 2 of 3 to Baltimore in Baltimore. That was a big test that they just couldn't live up to. Not to be totally surprised, right? Baltimore is one of the best teams in the league. Still and will continue to be, I would think. Cincinnati also, however, feeds the balance here, gives them 2 wins to the Diamondbacks, taking only 1 from them. So it balances out, right? They just kind of had a 3-3 sort of week. Arizona continues to be in the middle, but they're just a few key wins away from looking like a contender in the National League once again. And some of those wins could come against Detroit this week before they have to take on the Dodgers, do these Diamondbacks. And we'll see who's winning between those two teams in their next key matchup. I know I predicted the Arizona Diamondbacks to win this division over the Dodgers, and as absolutely incorrect as that is going to be, and I get that, this still looks like a cool potential playoff preview like we've seen as recently as last year. How do you feel about Arizona? Where do they sit in your brain, Dan? I place them at number 14 in our rankings.
Yeah, the team, this Arizona team feels like a 500 baseball team. They really kind of have all year another close to 500 week, and they find themselves in offensive stats and in pitching stats right in the middle of the league in a lot of different ways. A 4.21 ERA is probably worse than they expected from the staff. So that's still an area of opportunity. And I think Jordan Montgomery is taking longer to settle in than we would have expected. We saw some other free agents that were late struggle a little bit and then kind of settle in. And Montgomery's already been through 3 starts, and I don't think we've seen his peak yet. So there's still that to look forward to. I can talk myself into ways that the D-backs are going to like get back to where they were last year. I don't know, Warren, though. I really do get away like a lot of strong 500 vibes from this team. And it reminds me how special last year was, how they made a lot of acquisitions at the trade deadline that really helped spurn them for another run. And I don't know if that's something we'll see happen again this year. So it makes me kind of worried that Arizona might be getting close to drifting.
They could be. Some of the things that they did in the offseason are panning out well for them, but not all of them. I'd say on the plus side, Jock Peterson's fit into the team well and provided 1.2 WAR. Ketel Marte's been easily their best player, sitting at 2.8. Wow, he's been a stud for them, and we can acknowledge that. But guys like Lourdes Gurriel Jr., who started off being explosive for this offense, have certainly cooled off. And certain young pieces around the lineup that you kind of hoped would continue to grow, like Geraldo Perdomo, Alec Thomas. These are examples of guys who have not exactly grown into the kind of pieces that you would expect to see carry a team. Blaze Alexander caught my eye when he first debuted with the squad a couple of weeks ago, but has not given them much to talk about since then. And then, of course, the elephant in the room from my perspective is how is Eugenio Suarez doing for this squad? And he's only hit 3 home runs and provided 23 RBI, which is good for maybe 3rd or 4th in the team, but you had to expect them to want more out of him. And I don't yet miss him from the Seattle situation. So you kind of have to consider that maybe bordering on a bust to an extent. We'll have to see how it continues to pan out in that way for Arizona as the season goes on. And then Corbin Carroll has also struggled to get going. He's had flashes of looking like a National League MVP candidate that he was projected to be when the season started, but they're literally only flashes. You have to think that those are actually encouraging signs when you couple that with the fact that maybe we haven't seen the best version of Jordan Montgomery yet, right? You're going to see some of these players mature into a more complete version of themselves that you can expect to help carry the team throughout the rest of the season. But if even some of that doesn't come to pass, then you have to think this was kind of a swing and the miss on the entire season, especially after being ahead of schedule like they were this past year in 2023, that is. So you're right. You're right on the money, Dan. Is this a 500 team? Because they're not proving us otherwise yet, despite how everything seems to lay out on paper. So got to piece the right pieces together now and prove that they're ready to move forward. And they could very well do that against Detroit, but they're really going to see where they're at against the Dodgers later in the week. But they belong right here in kind of the B plus, right? The B minus really stages of our countdown. And that puts you in the hot seat for lucky number 13. Lucky number 13. I would pick a team here that may actually, be lucky later on down the line. Who you have at this stage, Dan?
Yeah, with that in mind, I think number 13 got to do the Chicago Cubs.
Ooh, a good choice for a lucky team.
Yeah, they're at a point where we've talked about how they've been dealing with tons of injury and they actually performed really well and finally have some people coming back. So Seiya Suzuki is back from the IL, which is great to get him out there. Bellinger's been back, but he's still just DHing. He's not playing in the field. So getting Suzuki back is a huge boost for them. Unfortunately, right as that happened, Dansby Swanson went to the IL. He's actually been playing through a knee injury for the last few weeks and hasn't been getting better. So he's just going to the IL to rest it and will hopefully be back when that stint is over. Also, fun news, Warren, Kyle Hendricks came back and only allowed 1 run through 5 innings, a 2.26 ERA. Nice to see. Very encouraging for them. But I think the main thing, this is all great for the Cubs, and they did manage to win 3 games this week, one against a tough Atlanta team and a couple against the divisional rival Pittsburgh. The only game that they lost was one that you mentioned, Paul Skeens premiered in. But
Yep.
the struggles for the Cubs team is really the bullpen. They're a good baseball team on all sides of the ball, but the bullpen is continuing to kind of hold them back. Their bullpen ERA is a 4.61, good for 24th in the league. And they're already lacking Alzolay, Merriweather, Smiley, Almonte, and Palencia. So they made a move to try and bolster the bullpen a little bit. A player that they originally drafted and got bounced around and released by half the league. They acquired Tyson Miller for a AAA infielder from Seattle.
Yeah.
Warren, I don't know if you've seen him before, but they're going to throw him in the bullpen and see if he can help out.
Oh, Bud, I can talk on this a little bit. Tyson Miller was getting buzz around the Seattle organization as what they were nicknaming a baby Seawald, someone who could really lean on a slider and a fastball combo to kind of frustrated batters fairly consistently, or at least potentially. So they were spending a good part of the spring training and the early part of this season really circling Miller as someone to make a focus of our pitching programs. And you know what that means in Seattle. Maybe the guy was going to be somebody. So I'm excited, honestly, for Chicago to pick up a Miller because he could very well play some pivotal role in that bullpen for the year on out for a team that I did predict to win this division. And so I'm looking for that to come to pass. I do see a lot of the writing on the wall for Chicago being one of better health, right? You get Justin Steele back. You get Javier Assad, who is dealing, man. They probably have the best starting rotation in the division. And if they can stay healthy, why see that change as the year goes on from this point on? So lots of encouraging signs in Chicago, and good for them on the Tyson Miller pickup. They give up Jake Slaughter, an infielder who actually contributes with the bat in his hands in a way that Seattle can be encouraged by. It adds some more infield depth to a team that has a lot of different ways they can handle what they're up to, but let's not make it about Seattle too much. Chicago's in a good position. Health is returning to them. They've got a great rotation. Their offense is cool. This Pete Crow Armstrong kid is playing with a chip on his shoulder and looked great against Atlanta in the third game of their matchup the other day. So I like what I'm seeing out of Chicago for reasons other than just the fact that I picked them to win this division. I'm encouraged, and I think right now is a good time to be tuning into their baseball games. Lucky number 13 indeed. I would not be surprised to see them continuing to rise. Now, right at the moment, though, they gear up for a tough series of series, if you will, in the next week. And I'm trying to get that in front of me to give you a good slated preview, my friends. Pittsburgh, once again, 4 games with them this time, and that is going to be at home. So this could be a really great chance for them to gain more ground on the division before they get 3 more against Atlanta, and that will be at home. Gotta really expect that series to show us truly what the Cubs are made of at this stage. But I like what I'm seeing. I really do think this is one of the better teams in the National League and are on the trajectory to be that way unless injuries continue to derail them later on in the season. We'll see if that happens. But what do you think? Are they looking like a more stable choice in this division than they did at the beginning of the year for you, Dan?
Definitely. They've already proven that they can do it through injury, and that's something that the other teams in the division are struggling with even now, or even healthy, in case teams like the Cardinals, right? So, yeah, definitely. I think that the Brewers are going to give them a run for their money, but I could see the Cubs rising to the top here.
Yeah, let's give them some kudos for sure. Craig Counsell's truly turned into the kind of thinking coach that can help them weather some storms, and there's a big reason why he was maybe the biggest touted piece that they brought in over the offseason, even beyond Bellinger, bringing him back. So it's good moves right now, and I'm excited for the Cubs. Next, though, is a team that I started off the season being very excited about and picking on a whim almost to win their division, and now I'm beginning to think show some signs of slowing down in a concerning way. I'm talking, of course, about the Cleveland Guardians to sit at number 12 on our countdown this week after a 1-3 week to none other than the Chicago White Sox. before taking 2 of 1 against the Rangers. Cleveland sits at 3-4 for the week and now 27-17 for the season. So obviously, to this point, being one of the better teams in baseball, but have started to show signs that maybe this is not sustainable. Fun fact about the Guardians when last I looked, Dan, but they are one of the bottom teams when it comes to quality starts across their pitching staff. They sit at 4 overall, and I think a couple other teams only have about that much, but it's a concerning sign for one of the better teams in the league, you would think. And they have a league-leading bullpen ERA. That's where the story has been in the pitching side. It's not been their starters that have defined the year so far. It's been the bullpen. And as much as I love Emmanuel Clase, and you can typically book it when he's coming in to close a game when they're on top, well, they may not have the offense to assume that they're going to be on top against the tougher teams around the league. And taking Emmanuel Clase out of it might mean, well, their pitching situation isn't as stable as they think it is out in Cleveland. I have some concerns for later in the season, and that's why I have them at number 12 right now. How do you feel about Cleveland? Are they going to continue to be a divisional winner in your mind for this division? I know that you have somebody else circled as the potential winner in the AL Central. Where do you stand on the Cleveland Guardians, Dan?
Yeah, I think they've done really well up until this point, but I do see the cracks, like you pointed out, that there's not necessarily totally complete, and we know that they're one of the least changed teams from last year, except for the new manager. So I don't know. They're going to play the Mets this coming week, so I'm looking forward to actually seeing them and how they do against a team like us that has decent pitching and not so much on the hitting side of things. I hope that we can squeeze out a win against them, but if not, I might have more to say on Cleveland next week.
Yeah, and first they have to get through the buzzsaw, or the general buzzsaw that the Minnesota Twins have been. So you have to expect they're going to take a lump or two there, at least with the way momentum's trending. I've also got my eye on Jose Ramirez. I mean, as good as he is, he's not necessarily the reason why the team has gotten off to a hot start. He's been more a piece of the story, if you will, and you want to see him play at the all-star level that kind of circles him as the best player on this team in order for them to succeed. They're still missing Steven Kwan instead, and Josh Naylor has made a run as being the best overall player on their offensive side, as has Andres Jimenez. But I just want to see more out of Ramirez, especially to help solidify this team a little bit more. But it seems to be trending in the other direction, so we'll see if it continues this week. And if that left us without anything more to say on Cleveland, which it seems to have done, that leaves you next at number 11, the final team outside our top 10 this week, Dan. Make it a good one. There's some interesting names still up on the board.
Wow. Well, at this point, Warren, there's a team that is good, but I don't want to put in the top 10.
Okay.
And it's going to have to be the Chicago White Sox, who have been rising. These last few weeks, they've been rising, and I just can't see them go up too high because, yeah, it's true. They won 5 games this week. They won 2 against Washington. They won 3 against Cleveland. Still haven't managed to sweep. And, Tommy Pham is really starting to heat up, and that's been a huge contributor to this offense. They're actually 10-7 over their last 17 games. So a winning record and really starting to turn it around. It's pretty encouraging. Moncada and Robert Jr. are still hurt, so it's still a couple plus sides that could be coming back to the scene at some point. And on the pitching side of things, Chris Flexen and Eric Fady have both been excellent. And it's encouraging to see the White Sox just be a little bit more competitive. Is it going to be sustainable? I don't know. If some of these other players like Moncada and Robert come back, then yeah, definitely. I think that they could, but they do have a pretty tough schedule coming up. So I hope it's not a athletic situation where they make this huge gain and then they just lose it all in the next week.
It's more likely that it is, of course. I mean, let's be real. It's the White Sox. Garrett Crochet has also been magical for them overall. I mean, he's starting to bleed into the four territory for his ERA, but another great pitcher that you typically can't really call how your day is going to go against him. Generally, he's been very strong. So kudos to the Chicago White Sox for having a good week, as you kind of hope each team to have at some point, and this is about as good as it gets, at least so far into their year. And the story's just been timely hitting this week. I know Gavin Sheets got off to a hot start for this team, but has since cooled off, and there's not a whole lot of reliable hands pushing this team forward. Arguably, their best player has been Corey Lee, contributing a .7 WAR to this point, and then Paul DeYoung, who they picked up from the Cardinals, has done some pretty key stuff for them, especially in the last, I would say, couple of days and during a better run. But yes, Tommy Pham was a good addition. He's just there playing baseball because he loves it. And I know they picked up Robbie Grossman, or did they trade him away? Maybe I shouldn't talk about Robbie Grossman right at the moment. But overall, this is a White Sox team that you can't think any positivity is truly too sustainable. And certainly with the New York Yankees looming as their next matchup, they have to expect to take at least two lumps there before it's time for Toronto to welcome them to their neck of the woods. And that's going to be an interesting matchup to see just really how sharp the teeth are on these White Sox right at the moment and how hard they really can kick. But I don't blame you wanting to block them from being a top 10 team this week. You know how my methods work, man. This could have easily snuck into like a top 6 team and been a true riser. So I don't blame you for wanting to avoid Chicago White Sox having that kind of allocation, even if it is just for 1 week. They do. This is fair. I'm glad you have them at number 11, really, all things considered, because I didn't want to have to try to pitch them as a top team overall, even though my integrity to our process would have put them there. Stay tuned for some more of those kinds of teams here pretty soon. But first, our top 10 team this week, yet again, I'd like to say, is the Kansas City Royals. They are certainly Dan's favorite to come out of the AL Central. And honestly, in my heart, I have fun rooting for the Royals, unless, of course, they're facing my Seattle Mariners, which was the case this past week. Now, the Royals did march through a pretty decent week for them, going 4-3, first taking 3 of 4 away from the Los Angeles Angels in Anaheim, an outcome you would like to expect, before losing 2 of 3 to the Seattle Mariners in a very entertaining series for me to watch because I like both these teams. Was curious what the Bobby Witt Jr. versus Julio Rodriguez matchup might cause from either player. And, Bobby's just such an amazing player at this point. One of the top in the game on both sides of the ball, but especially on offense. He's got a 2.8 WAR topping that team and topping Julio. So you have to think of the albatross contracts provided to young superstars in the last couple of years. Bobby is winning the race at this second, even though Julio does amazing things defensively and occasionally offensively this season. And we'll probably get going soon. But, the joke is let's not make it about the Mariners, and I won't. We'll go back to the Royals and point out that Salvador Perez continues to be a heat pump of awesome output. He's been having one of the better years of his career on the same lines that Marcell Ozuna has had in Atlanta. This is really kind of a cool story in Salvi. Michael Garcia is also one of my favorite Royals to watch, as is Vinny Pasquantino. That collection of players really does, make up the core of what is so exciting out in Kansas City. And then guys like Kyle Isbell, Adam Frazier, Hunter Renfroe, the occasional Michael Massey appearance, and then that 3-run bomb from Nelson Vasquez that cost maybe a potential sweep of the Royals for the Seattle Mariners this past week also gets a nod. So, everybody's doing their thing. Everybody's got a role. Everybody seems to know what they need to provide to the offense, especially, but we can't sleep on the pitching out in Kansas City. Reagans continues to be one of the better pitchers in the American League, as does Seth Lugo. And it's exciting to see how good they continue to be out on the mound. Even Michael Wacha kind of frustrated Seattle. Not that it's hard to frustrate that lineup, all things considered, but yeah, this is a really strong position for this team to be in, and even though they didn't have the winningest of weeks, you got to like Kansas City's chances to continue to get better at this stage of the season. And with Oakland and Detroit coming up, I bet they're going to have a better week this week. You got to love these Royals, right, Dan?
Absolutely, and also Will Smith coming out of the bullpen has been great. I think you mentioned Lugo, and just so happy that the rotation is staying in there, and they've managed 21 quality starts, which is up there in the league. So really glad to see that that's kind of the bedrock for this team right now. And
Hmm.
actually, this past week, Bobby Witt's probably had the most struggles of anybody, and we've seen the rest of the roster really stepping up. Of course, Perez is in there, but also Frazier and Hampson, and it's good to see some more guys lighting it up. So very balanced, and Royals are on the rise after a week where I would argue I would have liked to see them maybe squeeze out another win over Seattle, but like you
Hmm.
mentioned, some tough games, and I definitely am happy to see the Royals on the trajectory that I thought they would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fun to see winning baseball returning to Kansas City for the first time since 2015. It feels like there's just so much excitement around this franchise. And I love seeing a new contender enter the fray as far as future big franchises to try to take down. You have to think Kansas City stock is higher than a good fraction of the leagues in the next 5, 6, 7 years. So we're just getting started talking about the Royals' aptitude on the field, and it's fun to watch. So kudos to them on a great week, even still sitting in the middle of the result pool. But team number 9 needs your attention, Dan. Who are you calling out in this position at this point of the season?
Yeah, number 9, let's go for the Baltimore Orioles.
Yeah, a bit of a dip
And
for them, but a fair one.
it is, yeah, because they did get a couple losses against Arizona and against Toronto. 2 wins against
Mm,
Arizona and split the series with Toronto to this point.
mm-hmm,
One thing I want to kind of call out for Baltimore is obviously the strength of their starting pitching. We already know about
mm-hmm.
Corbin Burns, but somebody whose numbers are not far from Corbin Burns through 7 starts is Cole Irvin, who was
Ooh,
struggling as a starter last year before being moved into the bullpen and kind of did a little better, but still mostly struggled there too. Really talked a lot about how he tried to get physically and mentally stronger entering this year. He's
mm-hmm,
done excellent so far, 2.9 ERA,
mm-hmm,
1.07 whip. Numbers really similar to Corbin Burns. And kind of great that they have him because they're going to keep him in that role as Grayson
mm-hmm,
Rodriguez is coming back pretty soon. The O's are
mm-hmm.
actually looking to do a 6-man rotation, like we see a couple teams in the league experimenting with, because
Ah,
they have a lot of good starters, so they're just taking advantage and letting them all start. This should
yeah.
leave their bullpen super fresh and really just helps them for making a long run into the season and possibly into the postseason. So I like what the O's are doing. I like the way they're addressing the roster, and definitely looking forward to seeing them hopefully continue to build on this. This is exciting to see the O's just continue to be good, Warren. I don't know about you.
Oh yeah, I love that they're a pretty much a lock, right? Atop the American League conference standings. This is a team that's finding ways to win regardless of which young pieces are put into positions to succeed. Like we talk about it a lot, but Jordan Westberg and Colton Cowser, these are young names we didn't expect to have on our radar for this team. We expected to be talking a lot about Jackson Holiday. And even though he's down in AAA getting his swing back, you got to think that everywhere you look on Baltimore's organization, you're seeing optimism and excitement for the future and the present, because they are right now one of the best teams in Major League Baseball. And it could be this way for the foreseeable future under the new ownership group, highlighted by Cal Ripken Jr.'s presence. Like, there's no reason to not look at this as a bit of a standard bearer for the entire league in a franchise right now. Maybe my stat of the week is quality starts. And I want to say that the quality starts out there are 6 for Corbin Burns. You said Irvin's been doing well. He's got 3 of his own. Grayson Rodriguez also has contributed 3, and Dan Kramer with 3 of his own. And, that totals to about, 15 quality starts. And that's among I'm not going to say the best in the league. I think that's pretty much middle, maybe above average here or there as far as how many quality starts you can achieve across the rotation. Um, and that's a good sign, right? It's all about the what's the word I'm looking for? Stability of the rotation. I think it really needs to seem true for a playoff team to be a playoff team, and Baltimore is just looking as stable as a cucumber. I don't know why cucumbers are stable, but I'll do some thinking on it. Cool as a cucumber for sure. are these Baltimore Orioles playing well, and I don't see it changing anytime soon. And I love watching teams match up against them. And now, buddy, I'll get to look forward to my team matching up against them next. I've been waiting for this matchup as Seattle gets ready to march into Baltimore, as we see two of the better teams in the American League right now go toe-to-toe. That's going to be a really exciting series starting up later tonight. Can't wait to watch it. We will also see Baltimore lick its wounds if Seattle scores some plucky wins off them against the they're going to lick those wounds against the St. Louis Cardinals, so you have to think that's a good matchup for them. And then they've got 4 against the White Sox as well. So there's no reason to believe the 27-14 record out in Baltimore is going to get too much more sour after this upcoming week and a half or so, because they've got, apart from Seattle, a pretty easy schedule after them, and it's just more winning baseball on the horizon for Baltimore. Anything I didn't touch on for them, Dan? And that's why I do personally feel like the Baltimore Orioles are just overall one of the better franchises in baseball, and it's fun to see, and we might as well just settle in and get used to it. So a good choice to put them at number 9. You can argue that the long-term projections of the Baltimore Orioles have them even higher even still, but with the weak results of what they had, this is where they belong. So I respect that, Dan. And that carries us straight into number 8. And last week, Dan, you surprised me by deciding to put Atlanta at number 21. I'm sure everybody who listened was like, wow, how low for one of the best teams in the league. Now I wonder how you're going to feel as I do the same to another one of the best teams in the league at number 8, with the Los Angeles Dodgers earning that position.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Okay.
But when we go from week to week on results, Dan, and we have to play in the pool in that way, the Dodgers are actually a middle-of-the-road team this week. I know. Shocker. But let's talk about it, because the San Diego Padres, took 2 of 3 from them in their new look style, in a very encouraging sign for those Padres until they fell flat on their face against the Rockies. But we've been there and done that. These Dodgers, rebounded with a 2-1 series win over the inferior Giants, right? The clearly inferior Giants. So an outcome to be expected. So when all was said and done, buddy, they went 3-3 and gave up some ground to the team below them on the American League or the National League West standings. Giving some room for pause when you say that the Padres could very well beat these Dodgers somewhere down the line when it matters most. Just saying. It's there. You can write the storyline that way. So the Dodgers have to be 8 instead of 3 or 2, or even, dare I say, 1 yet again in our power rankings. How do you feel about the Dodgers with the results taken into account, and as they get ready to look at 4 against the Reds and then 3 against the Diamondbacks? You expect them to return to winning ways, of course. But hey, they have to sit at 8 this week, Dan. Yell at me about it.
Well, I'm not mad about it. I'm not at all. I think the Dodgers are obviously a top team in the league, but I think it's fair. Like, they looked human this week, right? And that's a step back from what we've seen before.
Mm-hmm.
I actually just want to. I was going to take this opportunity, Warren, because we have kind of glossed over the Dodgers last couple of weeks. Really wanted to just say, like, the rotation has been really good, especially of late. Like, obviously, Glasnow and Yamamoto have locked it down recently.
Mm-hmm.
But having, like, Gavin Stone, James Paxton, and now Walker Buehler back has really solidified a rotation that was my biggest question mark going into the year. So certainly still a couple of blips of a loss here or there from some of those extra guys, and that's the couple losses that they had this week. But overall, I think it's something to be a lot more promising for the Dodgers going forward.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we never expect to see these Dodgers take a step back, I would say. And this week is the closest thing to a step back we've maybe seen from them in a hot minute. So, right. We'll be encouraged by better baseball from them here. All right. So we had a huge bit of lag, and I just kind of grabbed the baton when I lost your audio, Dan. So I hate to say this. Please say everything again for the Dodgers for the sake of the recording. I'm really sorry.
Well, it'll be on the recording, just like when you cut out for me. So
Okay.
we can just move on to the next one if you want.
Cool. Yeah, I think we've said enough on those Dodgers. They're probably going to have a better week moving forward with these next 7 games. No worries there. So don't you worry, guys. We recognize these Dodgers are one of the best, maybe 3 teams at worst moving forward throughout the rest of the season, at least from, flat out performance standards. But from week to week, the way we do our rankings, they had to take a knock this week. It was fun. It was fun to do that. Dan, take it away for your next choice. We are running out of teams.
We sure are. And next up, it's a little tough to swallow that they're this high, but I think you'll understand why, Warren. We're going to do the Houston Astros. And they certainly have rebounded in a way that you have led on. I'm not ready to fully throw it in and say like, oh, you were right, because look at the teams that they beat this week, Warren. They've got 3 wins against Oakland, who has really fallen back of late, and then 2 wins against Chicago. Only 2. I mean, and that's a team that's really struggled offensively, like we've talked about. So yeah, it's good for the Astros, even though these aren't strong wins for them to get them. But I think what we're probably going to spend our time talking about, Warren, and that's their best pitcher by far, the one that just last week we called the guaranteed win. It was another win for them in his last start, but it'll also be his last start for the next 2 weeks as Ronel Blanco gets a 10-game suspension for sticky stuff. Did you see, Warren? Did you see his glove? Oh, man.
Yeah, I've heard rumors that the umpires call it the slickest glove that they've seen in 3+ years or something like that. And a cheating Astro? Say it isn't so, Dan.
What? Oh, no.
Unheard of is that outcome. Oh, dear. I'm disappointed because Ronel Blanco was somebody I was enjoying highlighting every week for an Astros team that was otherwise poor. Like, it was fun to say a new face was atop their rankings of aptitude on the mound, and now it's clearly tarnished. The 30-year-old who spent 8 years working his way up through the Houston system or something like that is exposing himself as not above, doing a little bit of dirty work in order to get his numbers. And boo! Boo, Astros! Way to continue to be just not the picture of morality in the league. It's just, I don't want to see them succeed, but they did this week against those Oakland Athletics with 3 out of 4 thus far taken from them. You can only speculate Oakland won't get that 4th win in their matchup here. And then Detroit was the other team to drop some pieces. And yeah, Houston's just starting to look sharper than the other teams that aren't sure whom they are at this point. And, you have to expect them to have at least some better understanding of their identity when they're playing with guys like Altuve and Alvarez and Tucker on the offensive side. And on the defensive side, they continue to have their speed bumps with pitching. And that's what we have to bank on to hope that the wheels eventually fall off again. But the Astros are coming. The Astros are coming. I've warned the league for weeks. And yeah, maybe Seattle and the Yankees were able to prolong the burgeoning, but the burgeoning is on. So Houston's starting to make their move, and each team that faces them over the next couple of weeks needs to do their best to stamp out momentum. Up next for them are the Brewers. So a great test of the Houston Astros, and likely one you would think they would fail at least 1 or 2 games worth of outcomes. But then the Angels get to be the next team to try to stop Houston's ascent, and goodness knows the Angels are not likely to be even higher than them, despite their position in heaven. Well, they're dead. The Angels are dead. Anyway, Dan, yeah, Houston is maybe needing the best turnaround in years to be a playoff team at this point, and I respect that, but I don't put it past a Houston squad, and I'm sure many pundits don't either, to be one of those outliers that can run the table back enough to be one of the better teams in baseball when it's all said and done. I certainly hope it's not the case, but there's potential. Beware the Astros. They're not dead yet, and until their playoff likelihood or their playoff percentage hits 0.00, I say never stop burying the Astros. Fire truck them at all times, folks. You have been warned. Again, it's real. It's happening. It's happening! All right, Dan, you've done enough. We've done enough. I would have put the Astros in my top 3 seriously to show you all out there in baseball land that we really need to take them seriously. But Dan went ahead and pulled the rug out from under me, and that's okay, because I don't want to have to think of them as a top 3 team in this league, given any circumstances. Now,
then you'll have to.
circumstances did smile favorably on this next team to be able to return to the top of our fold. I hinted that they didn't deserve to be at the 21st position when last I spoke about a team, and now I'll say they deserve the 6th best position after the week they had. Welcome back to the upper echelon, Atlanta. Sorry, Dan. I apologize to you because not only are they the most hated divisional rivals and the one most likely to win everything ever, comparatively to the Mets, but they also did beat the Mets 2-1 this past year, excuse me, this past week. I want to say the story of them carrying a no-no into the final out of a game against these New York Mets was just amazing because Rafael Iglesias gives up what I like to call the botnato bomb to the stinger, JD Martinez. And that is the one blemish on the entire game for the Mets in that scenario. The botnato stands for the bottom of the ninth, 2 out bomb, by the way. Botnato. I want a shirt of it. Because that's just as dramatic as it gets. Way to stop a no-no with a botnato bomb, JD. That's how good the Braves were against them. And then 2-1 was the record against the Cubs too. And I gotta tell you, Dan, I watched that game last night, the other night, I should say, between Atlanta and Chicago to end their series. And I watched the Atlanta broadcast crew, 4 legendary members of the Atlanta organization, headlined by Chipper Jones, present this game to us. And it was the most cringeworthy experience I've had watching a game, Dan. And I will tell you why. It was just these 4 guys sitting around talking ish about each other, throwing jokes, basically acting like you and I did as part of the wild cards back in our old recordings, just shooting the spit instead of actually talking about the game in front of us. It was so cringy. I've never seen a broadcast so unfun to watch, sincerely because of the egos involved. I'm just going to put that out there. Couldn't help it. It was very unprofessional almost how bad they were. But anyway, the Braves are still a great team, obviously, and I know you don't like to hear it as a friendly reminder that they're better than everybody else in the division by a long shot still, or are they? Are they? I notice we still have Philadelphia to discuss, but that's where I stand on it. Atlanta deserves to be in this top 6 position. How do you feel about their return to the top of the league, Dan, in our countdown?
Told you last week, Warren. I told you that the Braves needed to rebound against their 2 favorite beat 'em ups, and that's exactly what they got against the Mets and the Cubs. And I mentioned earlier the Mets kind of snuck away with that one win that probably could have easily been a loss, like you mentioned. So, yeah, it's funny you talk about the Braves broadcast team because I can't stand any of those guys, and they are throwing strays at the Mets constantly. Like, I just can't tell you how many times this year. I remember early in the year they were playing Oakland, and I turned it on, and it was the Braves broadcast, and I'm watching, and they're just like, "Yeah, Oakland's seeing if they can beat the Mets record for the 1962 Mets had the least wins in the league." And I was like, "What's happening? Why are they why?" It's so just So you're totally right there. Can't stand those guys.
Yeah.
But
it's awful.
One thing I would point out with this team, even though that they had a good week, as we mentioned, I'll take into account the fact that the Mets were kind of an easy out in this situation, and that the Chicago games, they were kind of taking advantage of some of the weaker starters. As something that's kind of coming out to me is that the power, it's easy to see this Braves offense is really, really good, but the power is not what it was last year. Like, you have Ozuna still doing really well. OPS still over 1,000 behind only Shohei Ohtani, still tied for second with 12 home runs in the league. The next closest in home runs after him is Olsen and d'Arnaud, tied 5. And so that's kind of surprising, such a heavy drop off. This team led the league with 307 home runs last year.
Right.
But now you have Acuna, Duvall, Jarred Kelenic, Harris, and even Riley all have sub 400 slugging. The team overall is 23rd over this last month with a paltry 367 slugging. Really surprising. And I'll just point out that Austin Riley was finally starting to come around and then he left the game on Sunday with soreness. So you don't like it when players are trying to play hurt or put in a position where they're trying to work through some sort of injury, because usually power is not going to come out of those situations. So, like, with all that being said, they're still winning. Like, they're obviously still winning the games. The pitching has been really good. Lopez and Sale have been great. Fried obviously had his excellent start, and recently, in his last 4, in fact, he's had a 1.24 ERA. That's after starting the league, the season with his 7.71 ERA through his first 4 starts. So, just overall, I think the power deficiency is kind of concerning. I would even go as far as to say that the pitching is making up for the power lacking, to the point that if they weren't getting as strong as pitching performances as they have over the last week or two, I would say the Braves would be a lot closer to 500. And this is a team that's, remember, already second place in the division for the Phillies, which I don't think is something that we would have expected at this point in the season. So despite them being this high on the list, I still have a few red flags for the Braves. I would be concerned a little bit going forward about those things.
Hey, and you have every right to point out why they could very well fall off the wagon, especially compared to a Phillies team that's playing even harder and better than we expected them to, despite expecting them to play hard and good. So I wonder, when you tell the story the way you are, Dan, if we can't expect this to be a Braves team that is kind of paper macheing themselves to be bigger than they are, trying to just blow up their position and be like, look at us, big bad Braves, America's team, right? And playing with that chip on their shoulder. Maybe it's so real that they are already giving us the best they've got to look as good as they can. And maybe as the season progresses, they run out of energy and steam and start falling maybe towards, dare I say it, and wild card team in the National League playoff seedings, and then they stop looking like the world beater and instead look like the underdog against even the Philadelphia Phillies, more so than they are beginning to look now. So it's interesting stuff. You're not wrong. You should be pointing out the fact that this team does not look as ironclad a contender as you could think teams like New York, Baltimore, or let's see, on the National League side, obviously Los Angeles, and I would say even Milwaukee or Chicago, right? Like, there are teams looking more stable, you could say, even if Atlanta's doing everything they can to crud out their best effort right now. So is it sustainable is becoming a question pointed at that key contender. And, well, maybe truly it's not. Certain things need to get going. Acuna needs to get going, even more so than he has, to help stabilize their offense. Jared Kelenick's been as toothless eventually as I hoped he would be for this lineup, and yay, good riddance, be gone. And the rest of the squad in Atlanta is still trying to find the best way to win. So even though they're doing it, that doesn't mean it's sustainable. Good call, Dan. I actually believe what you're pushing there. I would buy what you're trying to sell, and Atlanta needs to understand that not everything is well, along the undertow. They could get swept out to sea if they're not careful and stop looking like the contenders they think they are and blow themselves up to be. And that would be really fun to watch all those Atlanta broadcasters get punched in the nose. As much as I love watching Chipper Jones when he was a player, one of the finest of all time, I get that. You're not supposed to be broadcasting baseball games, and unless you're a fan of Atlanta, you're watching just a terrible broadcast. My God. All right, then. Moving on. I was so disappointed. We only have 5 teams left to talk about, and all of them are playing well. I'm going to go ahead and slide across at you a team that should not be a top 5 team in the league, but is for this week only. I know, guys, you're thinking, Warren, your double standard is showing. What are you doing putting this team here when they literally won every game they played this week? But I don't want to put them above the last 4 teams that will come beyond them. So the Colorado
Warren,
Rockies.
is it your turn or is it my turn?
Dan, I hate it when you do that. You make me feel so odd. I'm the odd man out. Oh, man. Just do it. Pick your 5th team because it is your turn. Jerk.
I'm so sorry now that I heard what you were gonna pick too, because man, you're giving me the chance to pick the 5 spot. You already said all 5 of these teams are good baseball teams. It's the Yankees, dude. They're not a top 4 team in the league. Number 5, the
Oh
Yan-
man.
5-1. The Yankees went this past weekend, and honestly, Warren, I'm gonna go off of the strength of schedule here. They went 2-1 against the Tampa Bay Rays. We've talked about how they've kind of rebounded a little bit, and like I would expect a sweep from them. The Yankees did pull off a sweep against Minnesota, which we talked about already. It's pretty impressive. Minnesota's a great baseball team, right?
Yep.
But I gotta hold a little bit something against them for that Rays game. You know, Marcus Stroman has done really well. He got one of the wins against Minnesota. We talked about how he was struggling a little bit after a couple good starts. He settled back in really well. We're still at a point where Cole is probably a month or more away, and the Yankees aren't sweating it too much, which is great. And I just wanted to shout out, like Anthony Volpe. I've gotten to watch a little bit more of him. He's really settling into that leadoff position, Warren. He's fast, obviously. He's got 8 stolen bags already. But his on base is getting better and better. And, you know, we're also, I think, still seeing that correlation with an improved batting average and defense. You know, his defense is getting better. We saw him make a couple errors at the start of the year, and that's improved a lot as well. And from a Yankees perspective, like this is exactly what you want to see. The Yankees have acquired a lot of talent in the last few years. They put a lot of pressure on some of their prospects. They don't exactly churn out at the same rate that we've seen the Braves or the Dodgers. So Volpe was an example of someone they were really high on, needed to get him as a full-time starter and give him a chance, see if he could shake it. And he has. He's handled the pressure really well in the big city. So Yankees are moving up, but they're not top 4, or not this week.
Yeah, knowing which teams are left has me chuckling, of course. But I gotta say, the Yankees are just looking like a really tough out and a team that, against all odds, I kind of want to keep watching. I think that they're just objectively such a good team to watch on both sides. And honestly, it's the pitching that's been blowing my mind even more. We watched Clark Schmidt dance around the Minnesota Twins in the final game of their series to complete the sweep. And that's not easy to do. And he may have been a name on their pitching staff I would have been least trusting of a win. And when you see it there, you know, going that way, you got to know they're doing the right things to be solidified as a playoff contender in the American League, the better of the 2 conferences so far this year by a sizable margin. And you got to just trust that they're going to keep going as long as injuries don't play a big part of either side of the ball for them. And, you know, you can weather Aaron Judge's mediocre, you know, last couple of weeks and see him rebound to be what he's been recently for them. And when you do that, you know you're going to probably make the playoffs with what you've got. And I like an Alex Verdugo on the same level that you're enjoying the player you just broke down. I think Verdugo's kind of playing great glue game for them, you know, and doing a little bit of everything defensively and offensively. He's been one of my favorite players to watch. I know I mentioned that last week, and it's going to continue. I just think the Yankees are, whether I like it or not, a team you need to get used to watching play winning baseball, and they needed to. This is the year where Juan Soto and Judge were going to work together, and you wanted it to pay off, you know, and you wanted to see if it would work, and you're going to put your full investment into it. This is the team that has put more investment into any other, like I said, it reminds me of last year's Los Angeles Angels, how they just kept pouring everything into trying to make the season work, and that's what these Yankees are. A friendly reminder, and it's showing, and they're playing like it. So, not surprised they're near the top. I'm not a huge Juan Soto fan from a personal level, but as a baseball player, he's a big reason why this team is as good as it is, and I don't see it changing. So, yeah, go ahead and have the Yankees be top 4-5 team in the league at this stage, but top 4, no,
Nope.
not with who is left. I'm gonna continue to make that one team shine even brighter, I guess. Now that I think about it, you challenged my integrity, and I've decided to let my integrity win at least one more pick. And that will leave me, I'm going to go with the Milwaukee Brewers. Since I pointed out that they had a rough week the week before, I should be the one to point out that that's no longer the case. They had a great week this week, and are starting to make me a believer in their offense the way I have just expressed I'm a believer in the Yankees as a whole to not fall out of the playoff race in the American League, barring crazy injuries. But with with a very impressive week, I'm going to call it what is this, a 5-2 week for them. The Milwaukee Brewers take 3 of the 4 against St. Louis, and they take 2 of 3 against Pittsburgh. That's just adding up to a complete divisional beatdown for them, and so they're back feeling good. They get ready for Houston in Houston. They get ready for Miami in Miami. So we got to hope Milwaukee will continue to keep positive vibes going for them and push Houston down a little bit here as they get ready to face the Astros in the first of their 3 games later tonight. Robert Gasser is the big story for me on the pitching end, especially because he debuts for this Brewers team and gives them 2 quality outings to win 2 important games against 2 divisional foes. Welcome, Robert Gasser. We've known that Milwaukee needs some stability in their rotation, so it's great to see this young rook debut and play so well for them. And bottom line, Dan, I just want to say that the offense for the Milwaukee Brewers is incredible. Wilson Contreras is playing like an all-star and one of the best offensive players in the league, period. He's been so cool to watch. And when you factor in Rhys Hoskins doing more for this team, when you factor in Jackson Chourio being such an exciting rookie to take into account, and Tyler Black on that end, to a lesser extent. When you look at this offense, they're just cooking. Bryce Terrain's playing well. Stealing bases. They're the 3rd again in stolen bases, I believe, still in the league. And so Milwaukee's got everything cooking for them offensively. And a little bit of stability in the rotation gives them just a reason to believe they're a top 3 team in the league right now. Top 4 team, whatever. Do you argue that? Or how do you feel about the Brewers? Do you trust them to be winning baseball games for the rest of the season? We talked about how they could seem a little unstable right now, but Robert Gasser helped me feel better about that. Did he help you feel better about that?
Through 2 starts, a 0.82 ERA is absolutely incredible. So definitely what the rotation needed. Colin Ray's been a little bit better of the late, but you don't have a lot of guys turning in good starts like that. Like they only have 12 quality starts through the year, and like you mentioned, Gasser just got 2 of those, which was 10 before that. So
right. And ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you all for being on this long ride with us. It has been an adventure. You may have caught some inconsistencies in today's recording, both on the audio and visual side, so we thank you for sticking through it. We do our best to have the best internet we can across our conversations, but sometimes obstacles come into play, much like the length of a baseball season. Not everything can be flawless in a podcast even. So we appreciate your patience. Yeah, great take on that team, Dan. There's no doubt about it that as we round the bases towards our final selections, it gets harder and harder to justify one above the other. But the Brewers have been one of those teams with the most consistent offenses in baseball. And I know we both might celebrate them winning this division eventually if they continue to play above standards in both of our minds. So good stuff. Good stuff for the Brewers. We only have 3 teams left, and we're getting the cosmic go home sign, so we better get through it. Who do you got in your top 3 spot? And you have an interesting choice here, my guy.
yeah, well, not quite the number 1 spots, but still pretty impressive at number 3. We're going to do the Colorado Rockies. The platinum 7-0 week, Warren. The Colorado Rockies.
Yay!
The Texas Rangers and the San Diego Padres. I mean, the offense just boom, woke up and stayed up, and it has been absolutely crushing. But I know you can probably dig into the offense a little bit more. And the one thing I want to kind of focus on the pitching side of things specifically is Cal Quantrill. He has been excellent since coming over from Cleveland in the offseason. A lot of pitchers kind of change what they do at Coors, or they try and maybe change up their mix or mess with things so that they can make an impact because of a ballpark where the ball flies a little bit further. But Kyle didn't really do any of that. He's a strikeout pitcher, and he just tried to do more of that, and it's working for him. He has a 2 ERA through 18 innings, 36 Ks, and it's kind of preaching the same thing that a lot of the other positive arms are saying, that they're just sticking to their stuff. Just focus on doing that well. And another one that has been doing that is closer Jalen Beeks. He's been real solid. He's got 4 saves, 14 Ks, and a 1.18 whip to match a 2.21 ERA through 20.1 innings pitched. So really impressive on the pitching side of things, exactly what the Rockies needed. Their staff was already good, but these are the kind of performances that send them over the top. And Warren, I think you also have been pretty impressed by the Rockies this week, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as soon as I caught wind that this team had swept the Texas Rangers, I thought, my God, let's tune in and find out how it happened. And as much as you expect me to celebrate the offense, and I can, I want to celebrate Gomber. Austin Gomber has been the other starter that's been pretty key to this week being above anyone's wildest imagination. And, if it had dragged on one more set of selections, sir, you better believe I would have given the Rockies the Minnesota Twins treatment they enjoyed a few weeks ago for such an amazing week. And it just has to be on display. We should thank the baseball gods for hearing our podcast and how much dirt we dragged the Rockies through, for the last month and a half or so, just to give them this great week, because it's fun to watch a team put it together. You asked me here as we were leading up to our talk if this was sustainable, by the way, and what I love to say right now is that it actually kind of sort of is, as long as health remains on their side and they do a good job of keeping Charlie Blackmon healthy, who really does seem like legitimately the kind of the glue guy who is good for a couple of hits here or there to ensure a game goes well for them offensively. Like, this could actually be sustainable when you look at some of the other young names who paid dividends this week. I'm going to talk about, of course, Ezekiel Tovar being huge, and he is the one who received a contract from the Rockies to continue to have him play for them for some time. But other pieces I had not heard of coming out of the woodwork to be part of the offensive fire this week. I'm talking about El Hiris Montero, who had a 3 RBI game. We had Justin Lawrence, by the way, on the mound, doing a good job, if I'm not mistaken, allowing 0 runs throughout some key innings over the past week. But continuing on with the offense, Jordan Beck is a young name who came out of nowhere, hit his first RBI during the series with the Padres, the second of the 2 sweeps they enjoyed, and then didn't look back, having, I think, 3 RBI or something crazy like that yesterday, or in the last game they had with the Padres. Like, all of a sudden he's contributing. You're seeing Jacob Stallings contribute. You see Doyle. Gosh, forgive me on slipping his first name from my mind for the second, but
Brendan Doyle.
Brendan Doyle, thank you, buddy, at center field has been huge for them. And it's just a lot of encouraging signs from no names we haven't heard from, and then being tied together by the glue man, Charlie Blackmon, in the middle of it. Like, this offense has just looked like a completely different product. And so why not have it be sustainable, at least as long as health doesn't play a factor? It could be. Why not? These younger guys are doing what they need to do, and they're no names. So can they keep it going? That's all it is. If they perform the way they have been and as confidently as they have been, this could go on for a couple more games, because the Rockies have winnable series next, dude. Maybe we're talking about them in a good light next week too, because they've got the Giants first, sure, in San Francisco, but the Giants are far from a unbeatable team right now. And then Oakland will host them too. So a couple of teams that are very beatable. It could happen that these Rockies will continue to be the best of the bottom feeders after this upcoming week. Huzzah, though. Isn't it cool to see that every team might win a string of baseball games from time to time? And if the Colorado Rockies can do it, so can your teams, guys. Yay.
Unless you're the Seattle Mariners.
Unless we're the... What? We have but 2 teams left to discuss now, Dan. And Just for that, Dan, I think I'll make you have to talk up your divisional rival as number
Oh
one.
no.
Yeah, dude, you asked for that. I was going to let you sing Seattle's praises for number one and go with that other team for number two, but now you have to. Seattle will be the number two team in baseball at this stage. And arguably, that's impossible. They're not the second best team in baseball, especially on the offensive side. We harp on it every week. This team continues to be the most susceptible to strikeouts on the offensive end, currently sitting at 400. We've broken the 400s. Oh, my heart. The 445 strikeouts are still good for the highest in the league are the Seattle Mariners, but the swings that connect are hitting at a clip effective enough to earn us some more wins. You see, the pitching continues to carry us. We won 4 out of our 6 games this week. First, defeating the Oakland Athletics, who could very well have proven to be a speed bump to us if we chose to overlook them, and I'm glad we didn't. We took 2 of 3 from them, and then Kansas City, as we've talked about earlier in our talk, did give us 2 wins as well. And we have some cool news coming up from the injury side. Dom Canzone magically comes back in the last game of the series with the Royals, and his first couple at bats were a little bit tough to watch because he likes to swing at everything. He's another one of those young guys who doesn't mind swinging at everything at this stage of his career, but he did get a good double for his final at bat of the night, which would eventually become a run, and a pretty pivotal one at that, as Kansas City and Seattle had a good tussle there for game 3 of this series. So it's nice to have Dom Canzone back. We're on the bubble to have J.P. Crawford back as we get ready to go to Baltimore, and that's a big deal. He did leave early from his rehab stint yesterday, so I hope that isn't changing. I have to look it up. But injury news is getting better for us overall. Brian Wu is back, and even though he left his first start a little earlier than we expected, his second start was great as he shut down the Royals in the final game of that series. So we're okay with Wu. I wonder, and I don't know if it really made it into last week's talk, I was kind of speculating with you, Dan, that maybe our Emerson Hancock, who's been our 5th rotational pitcher, could either be a reliever, which could be good because he's usually pretty good getting through the count or the lineups that he's facing once, and that's it, right? So he could fit well for a reliever spot with Wu being back. Or now you're starting to make me think they could want to have a 6-man rotation, same as what Baltimore is doing to try to give the rest a little bit more across the pitching staff. But, some people amongst the organization would argue, do we really think Emerson's on the same level that we want to take a situation away from Kirby or from Logan or from, and that's Gilbert, guys, excuse me, or from Luis Castillo, right? Do we want to give them less chances to pitch when they're doing so well? And I wouldn't be surprised if instead Hancock becomes a reliever. But I've gone on and on. Seattle's also been encouraged to see Luke Raley hitting better. He's been the guy that we're talking about most across the fan base because of his performance over the last couple of series. He's gotten some key home runs, gotten some key extra base hits. He's starting to look like the piece we hoped he could be for this team. So very excited on that front. Lots looking good for now. If the offense can get a little bit better, if Julio can contribute a little bit more, why not? I mean, I just expect him to be the guy carrying the load, and he can still carry a little bit more. I like where our team is at. There's been some buzz about Ty France being tradable at the first base spot, and I'd like to challenge that we're not ready for that on the fan side. I think he's hit a couple of important home runs in the last couple series too, and I don't want to see Ty see his way off this lineup yet. But we're cooking with gas, and we might be playing with some house cards. We're in a better position than we should be. Josh Rojas has been huge in carrying the offensive load as far as being a glue guy for us at the plate. But otherwise, other guys are starting to get more stable, and if everybody can kind of be average, I think we're a considerably above average team. And watch out, league, because if we're more than pitching, we haven't shown it yet, but I think we will be getting there pretty soon. Seattle's number 2, Dan. Ha 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 ha. I don't know why I'm doing that. Maybe one of these days we're going to have a platinum week from the Mets to be able to celebrate. But for now, Seattle's just doing enough to be above average consistently, and I'm grateful. I'm super grateful, and I'm not trying to have a big head about it. I think we could topple at any moment. We've done it historically. We know that. One of the only teams not appear in a World Series yet, guys, so don't worry. Plenty of time for Seattle to screw themselves. How do you feel about them, Dan?
I think you're right. Like they definitely are moving in the right direction, and having the pitching staff settle in and very much look like what we expected them to has helped a lot. The Brian Wu thing is definitely concerning, and I think you're right. A six-man rotation would probably, you don't want to necessarily shake up your set five starters if they're used to their 5 days of rest, if that's something that they're used to. But and you mentioned the Julio thing. I can only help but think of where this team might be if Julio had gotten going sooner and has been able to maintain that level of consistency. And I feel like you're reaching a point in his development and growth where he has the rest of the league with a pretty good idea of how he approaches his at bats, and they're just trying to handle those as you would as a pitcher. And it's time for him to start changing things up. Time for him to maybe start taking dynamics a little bit differently, or seeing if he could change up his stance or swing in a way that's going to throw off the pitchers who kind of seem like they have his number right now. And it's getting a lot better, but I feel like something has to break for Julio. Like, the team is doing well, and that's great. But when what should be your best player has still yet to be that best player, it just feels like there's still something missing,
Oh, 100%. And I'm going to go out on a limb and share with you something I talked about before we started recording that actually is a good point. I mean, a good buddy of mine pointed out this is one of the youngest teams amongst the top, contenders in Major League Baseball. Like, this is not a team that is fully understanding of what they can do yet, and are still growing and are really hungry to have offensive output. And Julio is the hungriest of them all, being touted as one of the best players in the league far before his time. So maybe he's overzealous, and the pitchers across the league are seeing that as long as they pitch towards his hands in the upper inside, sorry everybody, or towards the low and outside, Julio will swing out of his shoes at it and fail spectacularly. So, yes, he needs to make those adjustments, and that's why I'm especially excited by what I'm seeing from Luke Raley. I think I hinted at this to you, that he's been the guy who's been improvising with his swing and changing it up to be kind of unpredictable at the plate, and it's what's helping him hit the ball at a better clip recently. So I would like to see Julio adopt some of that mindset. Don't just swing it the same way every time. Maybe stretch out a little bit more to get your arms extended and try to get the lower and outside pitches that have been working against you so much more working for you. And as far as what he does on the inside on his hands, he showed that he can adapt to that and knock those kind of pitches out of the park last season, when that was the main thing they were trying against him at the plate. And he needs to do it again. He needs to get back to swinging a little faster and keeping his hands tighter to his body when he swings against those, because he can clobber them. He just needs to start making those adjustments. So good stuff, Dan. You have a great point. Ours is still an inexperienced lineup, all things considered. And if they can grow enough, learn enough, and be disciplined enough to get even a little bit more efficient, stop being the most strikeout friendly team in the entire league, then we will be a better team. Absolutely. So good call. At least we know our path. At least we know our identity. At least we know what our problems are. That's a blessing I think we can actually surmount. So this could be good. This is a good position for Seattle to be in. What's not good about their position is that they now look down the barrel of a gun at Baltimore and then 4 in the Yankees Stadium. So, yikes. The next 7 games are the best test we've seen yet overall from Seattle. I mean, we had a couple really tough series a couple weeks ago, right? When we had to run the gauntlet against many of baseball's tough contenders. Now it's purely the American League's top contenders, and it's huge. Let's see what these next 7 games bring from Seattle. I think they'll go a long way to showing us how ready we really are come playoff time here soon. And again, sorry about all the background stuff, guys. I really am. Sorry about all that background stuff. We got one more team to talk about, Dan. Bring it home and do it in the most painful fashion to you possible, buddy. You have to be responsible to talk up your greatest rival of the entire National League, and I don't feel bad. Ha 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 ha. You better cut at least one of those evil laughs, Dan. That was a little too much.
And I should say games that actually the Phillies took advantage of resting some of their starters, like Castellanos in one and Harper in another. But Nola and Wheeler have been innings eaters for this team, which has allowed them to use their bullpen as they drew it up to be used sparingly, and for 1 or 2 innings per game. So everything was just working out the way that they have to. And I think at this point, you start looking at the Phillies and think they're on a mission here. Like, they're really showing that their season doesn't start until September. This is all spring training for them. They're just getting used to things, getting into grooves, making sure they get reports on every single team. And I think the Phillies are going to be a really
Oh, Dan, I think you said it best, buddy. Absolutely. They're playing on a mission right now. And of all the teams who are on a mission at this stage of the season, theirs is the one that's actually, potentially mission accomplished, right? So you look at the Dodgers not necessarily being worlds better than they were record-wise a year ago. You look at Atlanta, maybe pretending to be bigger than they are. You look at Baltimore and, the Yankees out in the American League being that amazing. But Philadelphia is the team that looks most prepared to be better than they were at the conclusion of last year. So absolutely, Dan, you're totally right. This is a team on a mission, and they're in control right now. And Atlanta needs to be sweating because it's no longer a foregone conclusion that they're going to lead the American League East when all is said and done. The Phillies could very well be the best team in the National League. Wow. I mean, really, they could even eclipse the Dodgers. You never know. They're on a great clip and a great pace right now. Well, there it is, ladies and gentlemen. That is the 1 through 30. We've broken down yet another week-to-week power ranking for you. And we know this isn't your traditional power ranking. Clearly, the momentum changes from week to week in such dramatic fashion that any team could feasibly be near the top of our rankings next week. Just tell Colorado. It's amazing stuff. Now, next week, we've got some great series that we'll be breaking down. Some of the highlights across the league include San Diego versus Atlanta in Atlanta. How about Texas and Philadelphia? Is Philadelphia ready to topple the defending world champions? It certainly seems that way. We'll have our eyes on that series too. We're going to see Baltimore and Seattle and New York really sharpen whether we understand the Mariners to be contenders or not. How pretender are my Mariners? We'll find out. And, is Detroit truly up a creek without a paddle? They're going to face the Kansas City Royals this week in a chance to show that they're not out of the running in that division yet. So lots of good stuff, Dan. We're not out of it yet. It's going to get better and better. I can't wait for next week's anti-power rankings or some other clever name to determine where everybody stands in just 7 days. So if you'd like to ask us a question or give us some feedback, except on the internet connection today, guys, you're not allowed to talk about that. We know, okay? We know it's been a rough one. But email us any feedback you do want to give to coveringourbases@gmail.com. And be sure to check out the full episode, or what pieces we can compile of it, on our YouTube channel every week. This is where it's uncensored, unedited, and we certainly have some fun bloopers here or there for you to look to if you're listening through YouTube. So check out our channel, Covering Our Bases on YouTube, guys. Give us some likes, some shares, some subscriptions. Tell your friends that despite internet, we are the greatest baseball analytics show you've enjoyed in your entire day. Anyway, but it's been fun. Dan, if you're there with me, I wish you well. A fantastic show. I loved this week's breakdown and a second appearance in the top 3 for the Seattle Mariners. Let's see if we'll make it 3 next week after another chance to prove ourselves against the league's best. And, it's been a blast, Dan. Thank you so much. I'm Warren Sprague from the AL. He's Dan Harrow of the NL. And we'll see you guys next time we take another trip around the bases. Good night.